Dixie here. Each year I do an embarrassing questions or silly questions video. So I figured why not make a whole compilation video of 100 plus embarrassing backpacking questions. That way they're all in one place and you're not having to refer back to multiple different videos, and they can be more organized by topic, so it's a little bit more streamlined. I've also gone back and updated some of the information. So anyway, today I present you with 100 questions you might be too embarrassed to ask about backpacking. Do people hook up on trail? The answer to this, which I've had a lot of people ask this question, is anything that happens in real life can also happen on trail. I mean, in real life you have a bunch of humans, and on trail you have a bunch of humans. So yes, drugs, sex, rock and roll, all of those things, again, that happen in real life can happen on the trail. Also, like in real life, you can choose to participate in or opt out of any of those things. The next question is, have you ever run up on people doing it or bumping uglies on trail? Surprisingly, not on trail, but actually when I was doing the Camino, I was staying in an old monastery, and it was a very open public room with a bunch of beds in it and no privacy. And these two people decided to just be exhibitionists, I guess, and do the dirty right there in front of everybody, given it was like 11 o'clock at night. But a lot of folks were still awake, and they didn't seem like they were worried about being quiet at all. So I actually walked over there and let them know that I really didn't think that that was super cool to do, especially in this room with people that didn't want to be a part of that, and children. They didn't speak English, but I still think they understood I was fussing them out, because ain't nobody want to be hearing all that. Hey, this ain't no time for humping. Get down. It's probably your mama. Are there shelter social rules? This person went on a trip to the Smokies, and someone was in the AT shelter, and they felt like it was a bit too awkward to hang out. So they wanted to know, is it like an unspoken rule similar to choose the bathroom stall away from the occupied one, like camp somewhere else? Certainly there are social rules for staying in a shelter. There is etiquette, like, you know, don't clip your toenails next to somebody, and don't smoke in the shelter. And of course, if there was one other occupant and I was coming in to join to stay for the night, I wouldn't like slide my sleeping pad right up next to theirs, you know, gonna kind of space out, with, of course, the knowledge that if another hiker comes up, y'all will continue to make room for people until it's to capacity. But as far as joining another hiker at a shelter, that's absolutely expected. And a hiker that's at the shelter to stay for the night is likely one that wants to be sociable, or is at least willing to be sociable for the ability to stay in the shelter. It's very well known that you share that space with other people. So if folks want to be more to themselves and have privacy, they're going to camp away from shelters altogether, or if they camp at the shelter, they're going to stay in their own tent. They're definitely not going to go in the space where other people might join them. What is the etiquette surrounding passing gas while in camp when everyone is separated and can still hear most of what goes on? So I'm imagining, you know, you're camped out around people and you can hear each other shifting around in your tents, or pooting or coughing or whatever you're doing. So this person says, do you say, excuse me, and risk waking anyone up who's asleep, or just pretend it didn't happen, or that it came from somebody else's tent? One of the great things about backpacking is these facades and discomforts that we have tend to fade away, and it's the same with pooting, farting, passing gas, whatever you want to call it. It's a very natural thing for animals to pass gas, including us humans. So when you're out on trail and you're around somebody for any extended period of time, you're both gonna probably have to poot. And I found that I was a little worried about this when I started my thru hike on the Appalachian Trail, but after being around the same people, it just, I mean, eventually you gotta go, and it comes out and people laugh and giggle, but eventually you just get over it. And I mean, I just kind of let them go if I have to do it. Me and my friend Rigga used to kind of turn our booties off the side of the trail, and we probably still strung it along and made the other person walk through it, but we tried to be as respectful as possible, I guess. But the whole embarrassment thing just kind of fades away. And it got to be where I didn't even have to be around somebody for an extended period of time to feel comfortable doing that in front of them. I just had to know that they were also a backpacker who was just going to do that. You know, I mean, it's just something that you have to do, and it becomes very normal. In fact, it became so normal to me to just kind of let them rip that when I was through hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, I was in town at a shoe store with my friend Perk, and I bent over to tie a shoe that I was trying on, and the sales lady was right there, and one just kind of came on out, and I didn't really even think about I should be embarrassed about it until I heard Perk kind of giggle, and I saw the look on the lady's face. She didn't say anything, you know, she just kind of tried to act like she didn't hear it, but it was taking a lot of effort, and I was like, yeah, I forgot that people in the real world don't just do things like this in front of each other, and they think it's kind of rude. So all of that to say that something that I was concerned about became very normal to me. So I guess from the beginning, you'll just do what feels right to you. You know, if you hear enough people kind of moving around and you feel a need to say, excuse me, then go for it. Chances are people are probably going to snicker when you do that, but I really think that you'll find it just becomes something that's very natural because it is.
The next question, how do you ditch an annoying person who has decided they want to hike with you? There are probably several different ways you could handle this, but one is to hike fast. Get up early in the morning, make as many miles as you can, don't stop for long breaks, hike into the night if you have to, you know, just basically try to make miles and put distance between you and the annoying person. That would be the least confrontational way to do things. Sometimes on a thru hike, it's really fun to kind of stretch yourself physically and see what you're capable of, and to play games like this because you can get bored when you're in the wilderness for 2,000 plus miles. But you know, maybe you're not on a thru hike, you're just there for a short time and you don't want to race the miles away. You want to stop and really smell the roses. And in that case, I would say pure honesty. I mean, maybe not like brutal honesty where you say, hey, you're annoying, I don't want to hike with you, but just let that person know, hey, I'm out here to enjoy nature and some alone time, and I'm going through some things right now. So I'd really love to just kind of hike alone and have my peace. And while I've appreciated your, you know, company or the little chit chat we've had, I'm going to hike by myself now. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, just try to think about how you would handle somebody saying that to you. And hopefully you would be understanding and realize this person just needs some space. They want to enjoy nature by themselves.
Next up is, what's the best way to greet fellow hikers? Hello, a small wave, a head nod, or just a grunt. I definitely get the awkwardness of passing a fellow hiker in the middle of the woods, especially when you can see them coming from like forever away. So you've got this long awkwardness until you reach each other and it's like, what do you say? But I'd say the best bet is to just be yourself. So if you're in a happy mood and you want to say, hey, or you know, you're not really feeling talking to somebody and you want to keep it at a minimal head nod, then just go with what you're feeling. Sometimes I'm so happy to run into somebody while I'm backpacking that I just want to talk because I haven't seen a human in forever. But I would say on that side of things to try to be observant of the other person and kind of see what their energy is, because maybe they're out there and they don't want to talk to people because they talk to people all the time, you know. So I try to be respectful of that as well. The next question is, what are the rules or what is the etiquette when you're in the situation of a steep slope and you've got a hiker ascending and one descending? Who has the right of way there? The rule of thumb is that the uphiller has the right of way and the downhiller is supposed to find a safe spot, ease over to the side, and let the uphiller squeeze by. And the reason for this is when you're going up a climb, a lot of people say that they get this momentum about them and that if they stop, they lose all of that wind in their sails. But for me personally, anytime I see a hiker coming downhill and I'm struggling and out of breath on the uphill, I'm happy to move over and let them come on through. So a lot of times that happens. You'll have both parties kind of step off. No, really, you go. No, really, you go. But technically, the uphiller does have the right of way. So it's best if you at least offer them to come by first. And if they need a break, they'll move over and let you go. And if they don't want to lose that momentum, then they'll just go on full speed ahead.
I enjoyed the trail for so many years, but have never understood why the worship of alcoholics. They bum off everyone year after year and brag about the trail providing. Perhaps these homeless should be tested for TB and taken off our trails if carriers. I no longer want anything to do with people living on the trail bumming their way along. Well, I don't know about testing people for TB and throwing them off the trails, but I certainly do understand the frustration of this commenter. On the Appalachian Trail, while I was through hiking it over 10 years ago now, there were a lot of what people call yellow blazers, which yellow blazing is when you hop in a car and hitch a ride down the trail instead of hiking those actual miles. I never did this, would never do this. I'm, a purist. I go to through hike the trail and like, that's what I'm going to do. To me, if you're yellow blazing, you're not through hiking. So anyway, the issue is I don't really care what people do until it affects me. And there were certain groups of people that would go and they would hitchhike to trail magics, jump ahead on trail to get to a trail magic. So they would sit there and just indulge, overindulge their fair share, eating food, drinking drinks. And then when the folks who are actually through hiking, which the trail magic is for, they get out there to the trail magic and everything's gone. That literally happened to me, and it was a beer. I got up to a cooler and there was somebody who had yellow blazed ahead to this trail magic, and they grabbed out the last beer out of the cooler, and it was like their third beer that they had sitting there, and they bragged about that, and the folks who had walked there didn't get anything. There were also instances where this same group of people were hitchhiking from Trail Angel to Trail Angel House, like places where they might allow you to stay for free, and they were partying and being disrespectful, and then some of these Trail Angels just ended up shutting the place down for the rest of the year. They're like, I'm just not dealing with this. I do this out of the kindness of my heart, and people are coming here not respecting my space. And so, there's this bubble that's like staying right ahead because you can't out hike them because they're not hiking, and they're getting things shut down and making people mad, giving hikers a bad name when, again, they're not actually through hiking. So that was very frustrating when people are using the resources meant for through hikers and they really are just, like this person said, bumming along. I remember being in Maine and very close to finishing, and I had walked into a resupply town, and I'm sitting there getting a bite to eat at a bar and grill, and this particular person that I had seen over and over, beating me to different places, came up and said, well, hey, Dixie, how did you get here? And I must have just had a whole lot to say with my face, but I was like, I walked, like, how else are you supposed to get here? But I don't really know what the answer is. All I can tell you is this does exist, and I understand the frustration, and I think maybe it's going to take some of the trail angels or providers, of the trail, realizing that this is happening and being like, no, this is not for you. You got out of a car to come here, so this is for people who have walked here. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but all I can tell you is it does exist. There are crappy people on trail, just like there are in normal life, but there are always good people too.
The next question is, who is entitled to use shelters on a hiking trail? Is it the section hikers or the through hikers? And the answer is both. Most of the hiking trails I've been on that have shelters, it's like a first come, first served thing. So it doesn't matter if you're just there for a couple of nights or if you're doing the whole trail. It's whoever walks up there first gets to use the shelter. Now, the only area where I've seen that it's different than that is in the Smoky Mountain National Park on the Appalachian Trail. And I assume that that's what this question was aimed at. There they have an interesting system that I feel like causes a little bit of animosity between the section hikers and the through hikers, but it's neither of the hikers' fault. It's just the way that the rules are. So what the Smoky Mountain National Park does is requires section hikers to reserve a shelter each night that they're going through the park. You don't get to camp in a tent or a hammock. I mean, you can break the rules, and a park ranger can come through and fine you for it. But that's the way that it's set up. They're supposed to reserve the shelters. And I assume that once the shelters are completely booked, then they don't allow a section hiker to make a booking for that shelter. Now, through hikers get a special permit to go through the Smoky Mountain National Park, so they don't have to declare where they're going to sleep ahead of time. But it does make things a little weird when you get out on the trail, because they require you to sleep in a shelter, whether you're a section hiker or a through hiker. All hikers must sleep in a shelter unless the shelter is full. So if you come up to a shelter as a through hiker and it's full, then you are permitted to set up your tent or your hammock, but you still have to do it there at the shelter. And I assume they're just trying to minimize traffic and impact on the trail, so they don't have people camping at all these different areas. So everyone has to stay there, at least near the shelter. But if you walk up to the shelter and it's not full and you're a through hiker, you must sleep in the shelter. So the problem comes in, and that animosity I was talking about, when the shelter is full, everybody's all nestled in there together, and a section hiker rolls up and says, hey, I have a reservation for a spot in the shelter tonight. So the last through hiker that came to the shelter now has to pack up all their stuff and go out and set up their tent, hammock, tarp, etc. So while it might not sound like it's fair, it's the way that the rules are set up, and I have seen this happen on trail where even in the cold rain, a through hiker had to pack up and leave because of the section hiker. And I promise you the section hiker probably felt bad, but I assume they probably didn't even have a tent, hammock, whatever with them, because they are relying on these places that they reserved by orders of the Smoky Mountain National Park. So national parks can be a little iffy, but the shelter structures themselves, other than that area where I've been backpacking, it's first come, first served. If people are already at a marked campsite, is it safe to assume that you can join them? So some places require a permit or reservations for particular marked campsites. It really depends on where you're going backpacking, but if you have a reservation for that site for that night and somebody else is already there, then obviously they allow multiple hikers to book that campsite. So absolutely, you have every right to be there. If it is in an area where it's kind of like a first come, first serve thing, then you have every right to be there just like the other person anyway. Now, by etiquette standards, I prefer to ask the person who's already there, if it's a smaller site, like, hey, do you mind if I join and pitch my tent here next to you? Most of the time, hikers are nice folks who are going to say, yeah, come on. I've only had one instance where a fella said, I'd actually prefer to just be alone here with my son. We don't get to spend a lot of one-on-one time together, and we came out on this trip to do that. And I said, sure, no problem, and moved along because I knew there was a campsite about a mile down the trail. But if you're going to ask, be prepared to take whatever answer they give. But the bottom line is, if it's an open place, public land, and there are campsites, then of course you're welcome to use them. The next question is, when you camp with other people, do you put your tent right next to other people's tents, or do you give yourself some distance to avoid listening to snoring at night? So I kind of approach this like I would walking into a movie theater. People have this natural tendency to just disperse. They don't walk in and sit right next to the only person in the theater, typically, unless you know them. So I just think that it's best to try to give everybody as much space as possible for everyone involved. How do you find a place to camp for the night when backpacking and there isn't a designated camping spot? Do you just say, this area looks good? I know you need to be off the trail and in a flat, clear spot for a tent, but is there a rule as to where you can camp? So this is one of those questions that is not, a one-size-fits-all answer. It really depends on where you're going to be backpacking. So if you're going out for a weekend somewhere local, a national forest or whatever, you can easily look that information up online, or when you get there, there's probably signage that tells you those requirements. Now, if you're going on a through hike and you're going to be going through different wilderness areas, national parks, national forests, there are going to be a whole lot of different rules. And the general rule of thumb is you want to be 200 feet from the trail and 200 feet from a water source. Now, any area that has specific rules, you're probably going to find a board with all of that information. At Shenandoah National Park, they don't require you, like at some other national parks, to camp in a specific area, at least while you're through hiking. but they do have very specific rules. For example, you have to be 10 yards away from streams and other water sources, 20 yards from the trail, and etc., etc. But when you walk in there, if you're through hiking, there's a little marquee that you fill out a little permit and throw it in the box, and it has a list of all of those rules on the back. So make sure you get to camp early and you can find a spot that meets all of those requirements.
I would like to know how you all measure distance. For instance, how do you know you are 100 feet from a water source? To hang a bear bag, to dig a cat hole? If I'm a size 6 shoe, would that equal 2 steps for 1 foot? I learned how to approximate 100 feet when I was working doing surveying jobs in the past. So it's something that I never thought, the general public may not know how to do this. So basically anywhere that you could go to measure out 100 feet, whether that's a sidewalk in your neighborhood or whatever, you want to stretch out a tape measure. Now your tape measure may not be 100 feet. So if it's 25, for example, you would do 25, mark that spot, 25 more until you build up to 100. Then you're going to start with your toes at the beginning of that 100-foot line and walk that distance at your normal stride. I'd do this a few times and kind of see, once you get your comfortable stride, and then see how many steps you take in that 100 feet. You could even do it a few times and then take the average if you want to. For myself, I have about 33 to 34 steps in 100 feet. If I need to go 200 feet, then I double that. And you'll find that most people will have a stride of like 2 to 4 feet per step.
Do you ever get where you can judge how far you've walked? Example, 1 mile, 5 miles. I can never tell how far I've gone. There was a time where I definitely was not good at this, and it kind of feels like every time I get back out on a trail after it's been a little while, I have to get like reacclimated, but the answer is yes. I do finally get to a point where I can figure this out. And there are several ways. One, looking at the Far Out app or the All Trails app and like having the ability to see where I'm at on trail and to like track myself and see how quickly, I'm able to cover that distance. Or even if you have like a normal trail map or like you're on a trail that the distance or a stretch of trail between two different landmarks where it's a known distance, especially something short like a mile. And then you can look like, okay, it took me about 30 minutes to walk a mile. So I know in an hour, I'm going to do 2 miles. So my pace is 2 miles per hour. So kind of learning your pace, then you can estimate based on the time about how far you've gone. Now, of course, this will vary based on terrain, more difficult terrain. You might have a slower pace. For me, my uphill pace is a lot slower than my downhill pace. So anyway, it is something that can take a little time, but hopefully those are some pointers to help you watch and figure that out.
Does the Guthook app work even if you don't have cell service? Just very curious how you navigate. Thanks and congrats on your Triple Crown. Just to back up a little bit, the Guthook app is an app that a lot of folks use for some of these more popular long distance trails. It helps you navigate. It shows the profile elevation. It has a track in there of the trail, and you're able to comment on different waypoints like water sources, etc. So the question was, does that app work even when you don't have cell service? And yes, the Guthook app does not run off of cell towers. It operates through GPS. So even when your phone is off in airplane mode and you don't have cell service, you can use it just fine. Are the mile markers that were made out of sticks and stones on the AT, PCT, and CDT already there, or did you make them? The answer is both. Most of the ones on the AT, if not all of them, I think maybe only one on the AT I had to make because everybody that came before me made them, and they were really excited about celebrating those 100-mile markers. On the Pacific Crest Trail, I made probably half of the ones that you see in my videos, and then on the CDT, I would say most of those, if not all of them, I made. It just seemed like people weren't quite as excited, I guess because the CDT is such a create your own adventure trail that it's kind of hard to track the exact miles you do. So I think they just kind of let that go. But I just made markers for the official mileage on the actual trail if I happen to be on it for a 100-mile marker on the CDT. Next, there was a question concerning going to the bathroom. This person says they know how to do the bathroom thing when backpacking, but they rarely go as far from the trail as they're supposed to because they're worried about getting lost when coming back. So the question is, are there any tips for making sure you don't get lost trying to look for the trail again when you get done going to the bathroom. First, it's a good idea if you know you're ever gonna backtrack, and even in general when you're walking down the trail, just in case you need to backtrack, to turn around and look behind you every so often, because it can be very disorienting if you're looking this way, and suddenly you turn around. Even though you came from that direction, it just looks completely different when you're looking in the opposite direction. So identifying any trees, rocks, features from where you came from should help you be able to find your way back. Also, you should carry your cell phone with you. That way, if you get lost and you happen to have a little bit of service, you can call for help. But if you're using something like the Far Out app or All Trails that has the GPS capability, even when you're in airplane mode, then that can help navigate you back to the trail. Some people like to take their whole pack with them when they go to the restroom, because that way if they get lost, they have everything. But when I hike in a group, I typically leave my pack by the trail. That way we all have an awareness of where the other is. So if one of my hiking partners was to pass me, then they would see, hey, Dixie's pack's right there, so now she's behind me, she went to the bathroom. Also, it's definitely a great idea if you have a personal locator beacon or something like an inReach to carry that with you if you were to get in trouble, whether that's being bitten by a snake or getting turned around. But it's always a good idea to keep those right with you. And finally, somebody suggested getting something like flagging that's bright colored that you can just tear strips off and tie them onto a limb or bushes and then untie them as you come back and collect them again. And they even make little clips that serve the same purpose and are reflective, which would also be helpful in the dark.
Now for some pooping questions. Here goes a very location-specific pooping question. Guitar Lake is in the wag bag zone. And for those of y'all who are not familiar with Guitar Lake, it's on the way up to Mount Whitney from the Pacific Crest Trail. So if you're going to do that side trek to Summit, you will pass Guitar Lake. As far as a wag bag goes, that means you have to doo-doo in a bag and like tote it out. You can't dig a hole in that specific area for whatever reason. I've been through there a few times, camped once. It is a wide open and popular area, and I couldn't see any private spot where one could use a wag bag aside from inside a tent. Yuck. Am I missing something? How have other hikers tackled this? When I've been through there, I've done the Imodium thing to stall the inevitable for later. Woo, feels good to ask that question. It's a relief. So when I was going to summit Mount Whitney from the Pacific Crest Trail, Crabtree Meadows is where I camped, and they've got an outhouse. So I would recommend, if you're going that route and you're going to pass through there, use it while you can. But, you know, sometimes things happen. So you did mention one idea of going in the tent, which is not preferable, right? But I will say that my personal experience, I did not have to go at Guitar Lake, but I did have to go once I had a cup of coffee after a sunrise summit on Mount Whitney. And thankfully there is like an emergency like shelter structure at the top. It's not for just, you know, camping in, but hey, you could run up on some hard times. So that was actually even blown open with snow. So the door was like stuck open, but I just announced to everybody like, hey, I have to go to the bathroom. There's no real good place to go here. So I'm fixing to go into that structure. I don't remember if I had somebody stand guard, but I was just like, y'all don't come in there if you don't want to see something that your mind won't be able to erase. And I went in a Ziploc bag and then, you know, toted it down. And when I got out of that zone where you have to tote your doo-doo away, I was able to bury it. Some other commenters chimed in for that specific Guitar Lake area, saying that they've kind of waited till dark or went behind a rock, and, you know, having it closer to dark helps. But sometimes you just got to go when you got to go. So again, announcing to people and being embarrassed on the front side, to me, is better than being embarrassed because somebody came up and I didn't, you know, warn them about what I was going to be doing. It does help to get as far away from people as possible, even if they can still see you. You know, if you have an umbrella or something like that to cover yourself with, at least you're doing the best that you can. But at some point you have to go bad enough that modesty will take a back seat. Somebody asked a similar poop question about, you know, being in a wide open space, like in Iceland on the Lagavager Trail where everything's just wide open. And, you know, in those instances, again, you just have to go as far away from the trail as you can. Sometimes the layout of the land allows you to kind of tuck behind a higher point or something like that. But getting far enough away to where it's not like super clear, detailed what you're doing, but maybe somebody gets the idea and they can be like, oh, you know, I'm just going to keep walking. Having, again, something to block you like an umbrella or whatever, but you just do the best you can. The next question is, does anyone ever actually use those double toilet, no privacy wall trail privies? Like, who wants to sit next to your new trail friend and go number 2? Why are they like that? I've always wondered this too, so I'm really glad that somebody asked so that I would spend some more time kind of trying to figure it out. I posted on Facebook from the Homemade Wanderlust account and asked the question also in the Homemade Wanderlust backpacking forum group just to see if anyone had an actual answer for this. And one person mentioned that maybe it's for like capacity purposes. Basically, you have 2 holes in one structure. So basically you're maximizing that space taken, the materials that it took to build that structure, and you're not having 2 separate privies with like twice the wood or whatever materials are used. And you've got the capacity of 2 holes. Now, somebody said, well, I always thought the second one was for when the first one filled up, but I've never actually seen like one blocked off, like don't use this one, use this one instead. But I mean, that kind of tracks that it would be for capacity. That makes sense to me. Someone else suggested that maybe it's to cover laws for those certain areas. Like I've heard of certain areas where all restrooms must be handicap accessible. Like even if it's the most treacherous trail coming up, you know, it has to be wheelchair accessible by law. So maybe it's something to do with that. Like you have to have 2 commodes if you are going to have a bathroom or something, you know, I don't know. And then there was a commenter who said that they were glad they didn't have to wait in line. And although it was super awkward, they did sit down and, you know, use the toilet next to somebody. So maybe people actually use it for that purpose. I don't know. So if anybody knows like the actual answer, then I would love to hear that in the comments below. I'm hoping that maybe some trail maintainer can chime in here. How does one dig a cat hole in time to use it when nature is calling super urgently? The simplest answer here is you don't have to dig it beforehand. You can actually do your business because I feel what you're talking about, that rush to, you know, try to get there and get your britches down and do whatever in time before you crap your pants. So anyway, you can actually just go a surface dump, if you will, and then dig the cat hole beside it, scrape it off into the hole, and then do everything else from there. But one follower had an interesting answer to this particular question. He said that he actually digs he and his wife's cat hole the day before. So this would assume 2 things. One, that you get to camp early enough to like go scout out a spot to use the bathroom and pre-dig a cat hole, but 2, that you're a very regular morning pooper. 1 or more of these things may not be true, especially for thru hikers, but not all backpackers are thru hikers. So if you are somebody who does get to camp at a regular time and you have a regular time of day for a bowel movement, then this option might work nicely for you.
Next is, how do you go cat hole style in pouring rain? You just have to embrace the suck. I mean, it's already not fun to have to go to the bathroom in the woods, but then to have to go to the bathroom in the woods and get rained on is terrible. But you won't care, because if you're going in the woods in the rain, then that means you have to go bad enough that you're not worried about the rain too much. But having your rain gear on and just pulling down your britches and going, and this is another time where I like to have an umbrella, because at least you can hold it over your head and, you know, block some of that rain.
The next question says, this is so dumb and embarrassing, but it seems that in some areas of the AT or PCT, there would be a lot of people digging cat holes in the same area. How do you avoid digging into a used area? I think I would just die. Oh, yes, the art of finding buried treasure. I have definitely dug up a used area before. What I would say is, when you get the urge to go use a bathroom, look around, and the first place you think is a good spot to go, I promise you, you are not the only person who has thought that that was a great spot to go. So maybe try to find like the 3rd or 4th great spot to go, and that'll help your odds of not finding buried treasure. Also, a lot of hikers have the decency of putting something like an X with sticks over the top of where they went to the bathroom, or if somebody has stirred their duty in the hole to help it break down, they'll leave that stick sticking in the ground when they bury it. So it's like, you know, I claim this land. But other than that, you just kind of have to take your chances on this one. How much TP is too much and how much is not enough? Well, as I always say, we pack our fears. On a serious note, the trail really taught me to conserve toilet paper. When you're out on the trail and you really learn to carry only what you need, it kind of teaches you how wasteful you might actually be. So for myself personally, everybody's a little different. It depends on, you know, how clean your backside is when you use the restroom. For myself, I generally do 3 wraps around my hand per day, and then I add on a couple of extra days just in case. I also use baby wipes, so, you know, I might start with toilet paper, but I make sure to finish up with baby wipes, so keep that in mind, because if you're only using toilet paper, you may use more. Some people will use a rock, a stick, moss, or some sort of other thing they find on the ground to do the first wiping to get, you know, the bulk of it off, and then kind of clean up with toilet paper or baby wipes in the end. Some people even just take a whole roll of toilet paper. They'll pull out the inner cardboard tube, mash down the rest of the roll, and stick it in a Ziploc bag. I don't usually do this, but sometimes that's the easiest way. Just buy a single roll in town, and if you're on a long distance backpacking trip, then just use it until you run out and you get a new roll. But if you do find yourself in a pinch and you have soap on trail, you could always just use water in your hand and then make sure you wash your hands real well afterwards. I've also used like moss growing on a tree when I ran out of toilet paper. I only ran out one time. It is an unfortunate situation and not a comfortable place to be in, but you learn as you go, and if that happens, then next time you'll definitely adjust so that it doesn't happen again. Just make sure if you use something that you found out on the ground that it's not poison ivy, poison oak, etc. How do you deal with toilet paper? Bury it? Burn it? So you definitely don't want to burn any trash on the trail, including toilet paper. That's just against leave no trace principles. The best route always is to pack out what you pack in, but there are some areas that you may go backpacking that allow you to bury it. Others are definitely against that. For example, out west, like the Pacific Crest Trail, they get pretty much no rainfall, or at least not near as much as we get here on the East Coast. So it's not going to be broken down as well in the soil in the desert because it's basically just sand. So they always have the rule of packing out toilet paper on the Pacific Crest Trail. So really it just depends on where you're going to be backpacking and what their area specific rules are. So just make sure you check that out before you go, but of course the best practice is to always pack it out. And for packing it out, it can easily be stored in a Ziploc bag. Next, I want to talk about bidets on trail. Now, this is coming from a place of doing research. I don't have any personal experience with this yet. After looking into it, it might be something I'll test out going forward, just because I'm always looking for ways to mix things up anyway. Currently, I'm a TPer who comes behind and cleans up with a baby wipe just to feel, you know, a little bit cleaner. But according to bideters, us TPers are gross because basically we're just smearing our doo-doo all on our booties and pulling up our pants and calling it clean, and they're not really wrong. So apparently a bidet is as close as you can get to feeling shower fresh, at least, you know, on your booty. So the main arguments I've seen for using a bidet are: 1, you don't have to carry the weight of toilet paper, you don't have to deal with packing it out, creating more waste, etc. 2, again, you get a lot more clean than you would with toilet paper. And I could see this being a great idea for folks who are plagued with butt crack chafe to try, because I feel like helping that area get really clean could help prevent the chafing. Now, some people are true warriors and they squirt with the bidet, and then once they feel like most of the stuff is squirted off, they'll rub with their hand and then they're done. And then they wash their hands with something like Dr. Bronner's. And of course, again, if you're going to use soap on trail, make sure that you're 200 feet from a water source, which if you're going number 2, you should be 200 feet from a water source anyway. Some folks are like, heck no, I'm not touching my butt with my hand, and they'll still tote toilet paper, but they just tote, you know, a fraction of the amount that they normally would, because they just do a little dabble do ya type thing and make sure that it's actually clean and dry back there. And then some people even take like a reusable small towel type thing and wash it when they get home and use it again on the next backpacking trip. One of the big questions that I saw about bidets though is, should you use filtered water? And I would say, I don't know that it really matters as far as getting sick, something like Giardia, because if you go swimming in rivers and lakes and bodies of water that haven't been treated, your butthole is probably touching water that has Giardia or something that you wouldn't want to ingest through your mouth. So the idea of filtered water is, you know, you're drinking that stuff and putting it down into your guts. But it's probably a good idea to use the filtered water through your bidet anyway, because you don't want to clog it up with sediment, especially if that's the only thing you have to, you know, do the job while you're out there. There were two main bidets that I saw people buzzing about in the comments, and that is the Culo Clean. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but C-U-L-O Clean, and it's just a little attachment that you can put into pretty much any water bottle you would have. And then there was the Buttler, B-U-T-T-L-E-R, and that is its own separate bottle that has an extending spout, so some people might find that a little bit more convenient, especially if they're afraid of mixing it up with their regular water bottles. But I think if you use the bidet properly, then that doesn't matter anyway.
The next question says, I use a Gatorade bottle since it has a larger opening to avoid leaving my tent and bag for my midnight adventure for relief. How common is this? Most people simply get out of tent and brave the cold. Was on the PCT this year and never asked at our communal dinner. It's so true that like at dinner, backpackers like to talk about their bowel movements and other bathroom festivities. But anyway, yes, this is super common. Most of the fellas that I have backpacked around talk about their pee bottle. So just for this, they don't have to get out of their tent in the middle of the night, especially when it's cold. I haven't been brave enough to use a pee style and into one of the wide mouth bottles, but I have certainly heard of some ladies who do the same thing. There are some folks who have mentioned they use like a very lightweight collapsible portable urinal. And then one follower also said that they'll even use like a quart size freezer bag and go in that, zip it up, and then store it in the vestibule just in case there are any leaks or spills. It doesn't happen in the tent, and that's a really lightweight option. So it really just depends on your personal preference, but this is definitely common amongst the backpacking community.
What about going to the bathroom at night? If you're either scared to get out of the tent at night, or you just really hate getting up, or if it's really cold out there and you don't wanna, this particular lady that asked the question says that one of her friends uses a Ziploc bag in her tent to go to the bathroom in, and then she seals it up and goes back to sleep. But she says, I'm a little nervous to do that. I feel like it would spill or I'd make a mess. And me too, girl, me too. The first thing I thought of when I read this question is my friend Perk, because he hates getting up in the middle of the night to have to go pee. So he just uses a Gatorade bottle, and I feel like that would work well for most guys, and probably a lot of y'all guys have done that before. Just don't confuse the two bottles that you collect your water in and urinate in. But anyway, for us ladies, you know, it could be a little more difficult to ring a hole like that. So they do make urination devices, I don't know exactly what they're called, but they allow women to stand up and go to the bathroom, like the Shiwi or the Pee Style, or, you know, other creative names. I've never used one of those personally, but I've heard great things about them. There are a lot of ladies who love using those because they don't have to pull their whole bottoms out of their britches while they're going to the bathroom on the trail during the day. So I think in this instance, it could come in handy. Again, I've never personally tried it, but I feel like if you can stand up to use it, then you can probably get up on your knees in your tent and use it the same way, go into a Gatorade bottle, and then, you know, deal with it the next morning. I have read that it's good to not just throw yourself out there on trail with this and try to rely on success the first time. So a lot of ladies recommend trying it in the shower first and then practicing going into a toilet while standing up. And you could even practice, you know, in your bathroom, kneel down like you would be in your tent and see if you have success with that. For the ladies, how do you not pee on your boots when you have to go out in the bush? And I assume that the person who asked this question is probably from Australia, because they usually refer to it as the bush. First of all, I would say having a wide squat will help, so making sure that your feet aren't right under you. As you continue to do this, your legs will get stronger. Also, gravity is your friend. I like to face uphill if I can. Now, I'm not saying squat on an extremely steep hill, but just having a little bit of grade will help, so not peeing on flat ground. And you want to face uphill, so that way the pee hits down and runs downhill behind you. That way it's not puddling up at your feet while you're going. I've never tried peeing sitting on a log. I know some people like to go number 2, sitting on the edge of a log. I would say you would want to find a narrow log if you try to do this, or a narrow down tree, and make sure that you kind of angle your backside back instead of, you know, kind of leaning forward and hunching over, because then you're liable to just shoot pee on your feet like that anyway. Also, they have devices that help women pee while they're standing up, so they don't have to worry about squatting down. There are some called the pee style, the Shiwi. For what I understand, you can just unzip your pants, place the pee device in place, and you can pee without having to take your pack off or anything like that. Of course, you'd have to have the device easily accessible on your pack somewhere to be able to do it without having to take your pack off. What I've done personally is just try to do my best, but I accept that sometimes I'm going to splatter a little bit on my shoes. And if you pay attention to when a lot of ladies go to the restroom and come back to a group, they probably go a little bit on their shoes too. When pooping, do you take off your shorts? And what's the best way to poop? I'm always a tad paranoid dropping a log and it landing in my shorts. I think that there is a legit concern here for real. It could happen. I've never crapped in my shorts like while I'm trying to crap in a hole, but I have managed to get it on my shoelaces somehow. So you could absolutely remove your britches if you feel like your aim isn't that great. There are multiple techniques that you can use, like sitting on a log and hanging your booty off the edge, or holding on to a tree and leaning back to try to prevent making a mess on yourself. But if you just Google techniques for pooping in the woods or how to poop in the woods, I'm sure that you'll come up with all sorts of ways, and you can find one that's comfortable for you. But all in all, in the end, practice makes perfect. Next question is, do you think somebody with a severe peanut allergy would be able to backpack a major trail? Do you think there is peanut butter residue everywhere because of the insane amount of traffic? I definitely think that backpackers tend to carry peanut butter, especially people who are just starting out a long trail and aren't absolutely sick of it. So yes, there could be some peanut butter residue. I would say the best bet is to avoid common areas like shelters, picnic tables, etc. But I certainly think that there's got to be somebody out there who has a severe peanut allergy that is a triple crowner, or has at least thru-hiked one of the big 3 trails, AT, PCT, CDT. But I would definitely carry an EpiPen with you just in case, regardless if you have any kind of severe allergy that could cause death. How do people who need daily medication get their prescriptions on trail? Has anyone successfully gotten their doctor to let them fill 6 months worth of prescriptions? I did not have personal experience because I didn't have any prescriptions to worry about, but other people helped out and said that yes, they were able to get their prescription through like a Walmart or a Walgreens, one of the bigger chain pharmacies, and they were able to at least once a month or so get to one of those bigger pharmacies and get their prescription filled. Some people did say they were able to talk to their doctor and let them know what was going on, what their plans were, why they needed the medication for 6 months. And it sounded like they had a talk with their insurance and had them do an override to go ahead and approve 6 months of medication. Has anyone done a thru-hike while on prescribed injections that are more controlled? I have to do 1 injection in my thigh every week, and I'm wondering about logistics of this while on trail. I don't have any personal experience with this, but another hiker chimed in and said that he is currently doing a 1,200 mile section on the PCT right now, and he does have to have daily injections. What he did is he went to the kitchen store. I assume that's a chain. I've never heard of it before, but I assume that you could find them on Amazon. And he got a plastic box that's meant for holding saltine crackers. And I believe that he stored his injections in there and maybe even the used syringes. But he said that he's found a lot of campgrounds that have the sharps containers for proper disposal. And I'm sure if you hit a town while on a thru hike, if they have some sort of urgent care or something like that, that they would probably let you drop your sharps. I don't know this for sure, so you might want to check ahead of time, but I assume that if they're disposed of properly somewhere, that would be encouraged, not, you know, discouraged. When I saw this question, I felt like this might be an opportunity for me to chime in. If somebody didn't want to carry all of their injections and they had some way of accessing them, if they were at least able to get to a town once a week, then one less convenient option might be to leapfrog yourself if you have two different vehicles. Now, of course, this is going to be a potentially more expensive option, but I saw somebody doing this on the Appalachian Trail, and it could help somebody get out there and do a thru hike who might not otherwise be able to, just because they hadn't even thought of this idea. So what a fella that I met out there did is he got somebody to help him to get 2 cars to Springer Mountain, Georgia, so the southern terminus of the Appalachian Trail. And then he drove up to a dirt road somewhere, some access point where you can get a car to the trail, and then he hiked south to the first vehicle, and then he leapfrogged up and then would hike south again to this vehicle. So he was in a northbound direction going up the trail, but he hiked southbound each day. The reason that this works better for people who need to be in town more often, I would say every 1 to probably 3 days max, and maybe even potentially less than that, is because there are a lot of access points on the Appalachian Trail. It's just that not a whole lot of folks are coming through there, so it makes hitchhiking to town from those access points difficult, or sometimes probably even impossible. But if you are leapfrogging yourself and you can get in there, then you know you're able to get places that you wouldn't otherwise get a ride. And you can find these different parking areas either in the AWOL AT guide or in GutHook, which is an app that you can get on a smartphone. The next question asks about hiking as a diabetic who needs to have insulin on hand. As far as hiking with diabetes and needing insulin, this has been discussed in the Homemade Wanderlust backpacking forum group on Facebook, and it seems the consensus amongst members who are diabetic is using something like the Frio pouch. You activate its cooling magical powers by soaking it in water, and then it keeps your medications cool, even if you need something other than insulin kept cool. And it can be reactivated time and time again by just recharging it in water. If you're diabetic and you have other suggestions, please put those in the comments below, because there are definitely a lot of folks who would love to go backpacking, but this is kind of one of those things that makes them hesitate. Do you know anybody who has used a CPAP on trail? And if so, could you give us some insight? Now, I don't personally know anybody who has carried a CPAP on trail, and I haven't myself, but
Just as an update to this question, I have actually backpacked with a CPAP now after being diagnosed with sleep apnea. I took a ResMed Air Mini on the trail with me, and it seemed to work out really well. I had 2 battery packs that were a pound each. Yes, it's a good bit of added weight, but the Air Mini itself is actually a pretty lightweight unit. Unfortunately, I don't feel like I got a great test with it, because that was the trip where I got life flighted out of the wilderness because my heart was acting up. So I wasn't really feeling myself on that trip anyway. I would like to do another test with it sometime in the future. Honestly, I'd like to not need a CPAP anymore. And I probably should have carried it with me on my thru hike of the Arizona Trail, but I had all the breast pumping supplies and it was just too much weight for everything. But I certainly do think that it's something that's possible. If it's like a life or death thing, I would practice at home with the ResMed Air Mini and see exactly how many batteries that you need, and probably carry 1 extra just in case. So that way you're not without your unit, especially if you end up taking an extra day in the backcountry or something like that.
I did remember a discussion that went on in the Homemade Wanderlust backpacking forum group on Facebook. So I referred back to that, and it looks like some people found the Transcend Mini portable CPAP useful for using on trail, because relatively It was lightweight compared to other options, and some folks found that they could use it for up to 3 nights. They also discussed some battery options for charging a CPAP while on trail. Now it looks like online that Transcend Mini runs about $400 or so, but that might be worth it to you if using a CPAP is keeping you from getting out on trail. Also, some of the folks discussed that they had a mouthpiece made by a dentist, so it's got to be something specifically made for you and by somebody who knows what they're doing. But that helped with their issue and they didn't even need a CPAP on trail. That might be a pricey option as well, but again, it might be worth it to you. And several other people also mentioned that hammocking might help with sleep apnea. So those are some things that you could look into, and if anyone's interested in joining that Facebook group, I'm going to put a link to that in the video description. There are folks in that group of all walks of life, different experiences. Some people have never been on an overnight backpacking trip and they're just learning, and there are a lot of thru hikers in that group as well. So don't be shy to get in there and ask your questions, and you can also use the search bar to find previous posts that have been made on topics that you want to know more about. So what about hiking with dentures? This particular hiker says that at night they typically take their dentures, put it into a cup when they're at the house, put a tablet in there, and let them soak all night. On trail, they've been using a camp cup, but they just didn't know if there might be a better option out there. I've never had the full set of dentures, but I used to have a flipper with one fake tooth on it, and that's why I actually have the braces and all of that going on, so I can make room for an implant and be done with that thing. But what I would do is just brush it really well and rinse it off when I brush the rest of my teeth, and then put it in a hard container case. But if you're really set on soaking it every night, if that's just something that you feel like you definitely need to do, then maybe you could get something like a small Tupperware container that has a twist-on lid, so if it does get knocked over in the middle of the night while you're sleeping, you don't have to worry about it leaking out everywhere. And that's something, you know, I would try out at home, turn it on its side and make sure. And then if you are in bear country and you're worried about the scent of that tablet, you could get one of those OP sacks, odor-proof sacks, seal it up, and then keep it in the tent with you. Or if it's in one of those things, like I was saying, that doesn't spill, then you could put it in your bear bag with all of your other stuff. I would be a little nervous about putting it in the bear bag just in case a very skilled bear got it and then ran off with it, because that is something expensive. I know for just my one tooth on the flipper, it was like $300 every time I had to replace it. But anyway, that odor-proof sack should help you out and also act as a redundancy in making sure that if your Tupperware thing was to leak, it would be in a closed up bag.
I wear contact lenses. Are people confident enough in hand washing on long trails that they use contact lenses? Most people, because of things not being so clean out on the trail, opt to use glasses. And I think some of them will use like those defogging wipes to help with the condensation on their glasses. But if you're somebody who's just like, absolutely not, I need contacts, not glasses, then I would not just use hand sanitizer. I'd be using soap and water to wash my hands very well, because the last thing you want to do is get an eye infection out on trail. But I think that there are some people who absolutely do successfully use contact lenses out there. It's just, you know, easier and less to worry about potentially with glasses.
The next commenter says, this is not a silly question, but it's personal. Has anyone had experience with backpacking after a mastectomy? Because of my mom dying so young from breast cancer, it has been recommended that I have one at a young age. I'm so worried that the procedure may make it painful or at least extremely uncomfortable to wear a backpack because of where the straps lay or rub across the area. Backpacking is my heart and soul, and I refuse to give it up. So I don't have personal experience with this myself, but I noticed, because this is such an awesome community, people are willing to chime in and help out, that there were some commenters who said they had either a friend or themselves been through that procedure and they were able to backpack again. There was an OR nurse that said, due to drains and scarring that need to mature, that it could definitely be tender if you try to start backpacking too soon. She said that you should expect to take some time off, maybe even up to a year, to let it really heal and to where it might be comfortable again. She said you also might experience some menopausal-like symptoms like vaginal dryness, and that you'd rather probably deal with those things at home, getting used to changes rather than being out in the middle of trail when some of these things start to kick in. But she recommended talking to your doctor and asking this specific question and what you might expect as far as a healing time before you can get out there and backpack again. And somebody else mentioned that if the healing process is taking longer than you thought it would, or maybe there are just some permanent differences after your surgery, that you could look into talking to somebody who makes backpacks like by individual order, and you could have some things customized, so maybe the straps and pressure points are hitting other areas that aren't uncomfortable. So if anybody else out there wants to add to this, if you've had this done and continued backpacking and you'd like to share your experience, please do so in the comments. Are there any hikers here that are hard of hearing and wears hearing aids? I'm hard of hearing and I wear aids in both. Dixie, during any of your thru hikes, did you come across any hard of hearing deaf folks on trail? I love hiking and enjoy it tremendously, however, I only day hike. I would love to do an overnight backpacking trip, but I do wonder about safety when I would go to sleep at night, since hearing aids are not made to be left in the ears overnight. In the future, I love to hike the AT, but I wonder if being hard of hearing would hold me back due to the safety aspects. Any related feedback would be helpful. Thanks and happy trails. So because I don't have any personal experience with this, I asked the masses on Facebook, and there were a lot of comments in response to my post. It seems that there have definitely been people who get out and thru hike that are hard of hearing or deaf. There was a fella that thru hiked the Florida Trail that used to wear a cap that said deaf hiker so that people would know right out of the gate, and I thought that was a great idea. Also, another aspect that I considered might be tough is if you're hiking slower on trail and you can't hear somebody come up behind you that wants to pass you. For them, they're like, why is this person not getting over? And especially if they're trying to talk and you can't hear them. So in that instance, if you're deaf or hard of hearing enough that you wouldn't hear that person, you might want to put a little sign on your pack that says hard of hearing, deaf, tap me on the back to go around. But there's also a fella that I heard about named Mr. Perfect, who is currently on his third thru hike of the Appalachian Trail, and he has been deaf apparently since he was 2 years old. Now this is all secondhand information, but I asked if he had any social media so that maybe people who want to learn more about this could follow him, and I was told he does not. An update on this one, I've actually hiked around a deaf hiker now. On the Arizona Trail, I met a guy who was extremely hard of hearing, like pretty much had to read lips unless he had his hearing aids in, and even with the hearing aids, it I think was still pretty difficult for him. But I mean, he was an absolute trooper. Hiking a trail where there are a lot of rattlesnakes and not being able to hear that would be terrifying to me, but he did it. He was successful. And not only has he hiked the Arizona Trail, but like a lot of other thru hikes successfully, being, like I said, extremely hard of hearing. His name is Bob Worth, and he's on social media. He shares a lot of stuff. If you're specifically interested in the Arizona Trail, in the hiker group for 2025, he made like a lot of updates. And then once he finished that trail, he went over to the Colorado Trail. So anyway, a very experienced thru hiker who is deaf. If any of y'all know of people who have been hard of hearing or deaf that are posting on social media or have shared their experiences at all, and you can link that in the comments, I think that that would definitely be helpful for people. Also, somebody gave the tip of an app called Transcribe. So if you're having a difficult time communicating with somebody, say a hitchhiking situation, and the person is wearing a mask, and normally you'd be able to read lips to some extent, but now you can't, then using that Transcribe app can be helpful. But as far as taking your hearing aids out at night, yes, that would concern me safety-wise. I like to be able to hear my surroundings at night, but if you're on a trail like the Appalachian Trail that is well populated and you let people know that are camping nearby you that you're hard of hearing, you're going to be removing your hearing aids, I could see where that could cause some hesitation to let people know that, but I mean, you're going to be talking to other hikers nearby and you're going to be getting to know people out there. So at some point when you feel comfortable divulging that information with them, and it can also be a good thing because letting them know if there's a situation like a bear in camp and everyone's hollering and packing up to go somewhere else, you know, come shake my tent or alert me somehow and let me know. But some people actually wear earplugs at night so that they cannot hear their surroundings because they don't want to hear their neighbor snoring or a grasshopper that sounds like a grizzly bear creeping through the leaves. So I don't think that taking your hearing aids out at night would be a deal breaker for the trail experience. Several people commented on my post and said that they prefer to leave their hearing aids in at night and they'll take a break from them in the morning hours just because they don't want to do without them at night. Another thing to think about if you have hearing aids out on trail is if they're not waterproof, how you're going to protect them if it rains. Some people say with light rain they can wear a wide-brimmed hat and that helps protect them enough. But I assume if it's an all-out downpour, then the best thing you can do is put them in a waterproof case or a Ziploc bag. Another concern apparently is backup batteries. It would seem like a good idea to have a backup set of batteries with you on trail. And then additional batteries, you can use a bounce box to bounce them ahead for yourself, or you can replace them at different resupply points. There were several comments about how taking a dog with you on trail, if you're hard of hearing or deaf, could be helpful, and I definitely agree, because if there's something to be alerted about in the night, a dog will most likely let you know, especially if it's a service dog and that's their job. Or if somebody's trying to pass you on trail, a normal dog will probably be wagging their tail or growling or whatever because they see another person, and a service dog that's one of their duties will also let you know. Dogs that are not service dogs are allowed in most areas on the Appalachian Trail, with the exception being Smoky Mountain National Park and Baxter State Park in Maine. I would assume that service dogs are allowed along the entire Appalachian Trail, but that's something that you would definitely want to check on. But just know that taking a dog on a backpacking trip, let alone a through hike, is something that should definitely be well researched and not last minute. And not all dogs do well with backpacking, and especially through hiking. When you hike with your pup, do you filter their water or just let them drink out of puddles, or does it depend? When I go with Fancy May, I prefer for her to drink filtered water because dogs can get giardia just like people can. Now, if we approach a water source that's flowing and she takes a little lap here and there, I'm not going to fuss at her for it. But most of the time, she stays well watered. If I'm thirsty and I take a sip, then I figure she's probably thirsty too. So I keep a little Kentucky Fried Chicken sides container in my hip belt pocket. It's easily accessible and it doesn't allow her to over chug, because it's not a good idea for a dog to get out on trail and just chug a bunch of water. So when she approaches a water source, I try to prevent her from being in that state of mind, because it can cause stomach issues, and if they get something like their stomach twisted up, it can cause death. So I just try to make sure that she gets a little bit of water frequently instead of a lot. Now, one thing that I do stress over when it comes to water sources is stagnant water. If we find a pond or even a lake, I've just heard horror stories of people allowing their dogs to swim in these bodies of water, and then they end up with some sort of poisoning from the algae in the water and they go downhill quickly. I never want to be in that situation. So just make sure the water is flowing.
The next question is, how do people with dogs prevent their ground sheets from getting damaged by their dog's claws? For me with Fancy May, I honestly didn't even think about that before I took her backpacking, but it was never an issue. With that said, she is a pretty chill dog in the tent. She kind of goes 90 to nothing all day, and then when she gets in the tent, she gets on her sleeping pad and kind of passes out, so she's not super active in the tent. But if your dog is more active, there are ways to mitigate it. First, it will always help to make sure that your dog's nails are freshly trimmed, because that way they don't have these talons to dig into the bottom of the tent. You can also get nail caps for your dog's nails. I don't know how easy those are to put on and off. I don't have personal experience with them. I just know they exist. And then also you could get something like a polycryo ground cloth
It's pretty cheap and lightweight to line on the inside of your tent just for an extra layer to hopefully prevent against puncturing. So hopefully one of those options will help you out. What kind of footprint do I use under my tent? Do I just cut a tarp to size? My suggestion for this one is see if your tent manufacturer has a pre-cut footprint made just for your tent. What I ended up doing, because it was a much cheaper route, is I bought a piece of Tyvek that was big enough to fit under the body of my tent. So you want to cut it so it does not hang out the sides, because if you think about it, when the rain's falling, golly, in my eyeball. Whew. Suicidal gnat. If the rain falls onto the Tyvek or whatever you're using for a footprint and goes under your tent, then you got this big old pool of water in between the waterproof Tyvek and the bottom of your tent. So I just cut it to where it was a little bit smaller, like a couple inches all the way around the perimeter of the body of the tent. Now, where do you get Tyvek? I bought mine at the outfitter where I got my tent. Now, some outfitters may not have it, but you can probably find it at hardware stores. And if you see a construction site, you could probably even roll up there and say, hey guys, do you have any extra pieces of Tyvek? That way you don't have to buy a big old bunch of it. And it's probably also online in certain pieces. And I know some people said that they have purchased it on Amazon. So there are several places where you can get it, but it's pretty lightweight and cheap. And it does make some crinkly noises, so I recommend washing it a couple of times before you use it. But the more you use it, the softer it'll get and the quieter it will also get. If Tyvek is waterproof and robust, why aren't loads of tents being produced from it? The short answer is Tyvek is heavier, it doesn't pack down as well, and it's also a lot noisier. Although with time, as you use the Tyvek and kind of rough it up, it does get softer and less noisier. Just to give you an idea about the weight, Tyvek is about 1.9 ounces per square yard, and this is the construction grade Tyvek that you see when people are building homes and other buildings. Still nylon, however, depending on the denier number, but it roughly runs about 1.4 ounces per square yard. There actually is another version of Tyvek that is softer and more breathable, and it's usually used in clothing. And Tarp Tent did make a tent out of this for a little while, but it was considered highly water resistant instead of actually waterproof. And for a shelter that you're taking out on the trail, in my opinion, that's kind of problematic. But to each his own, and I did actually see instructions for making a tarp tent out of the construction grade Tyvek, so if you're interested to check that out, I'll put that link in the video description also. But I'm curious if any of y'all have made any kind of shelter out of Tyvek. I'd love to hear about that in the comments. The next question is, how do I know if my tent needs to be seam sealed? And this could be true for other things like a tarp, etc. But your shelter does need to be seam sealed in some way, because if you think about it, even if it's a waterproof fabric and you punch holes through it to stitch it together, you've created holes where water can come through. So most companies that are selling a shelter that has been seam sealed, they want to brag on that because it's not something that you have to do yourself. So you should see that in the description, you know, already seam sealed. But it is something that I would check with the manufacturer before I purchased a shelter. But if you're sitting at home with a tent already and you're like, okay, well, that doesn't help me now, I need to know, you should be able to get on the website and figure that out. But the bottom line is, if you pull the shelter out and you look at where it is stitched together, some might be seam sealed on the outside, some on the inside, but you should see either a tape type seam sealing, so it'll look like, you know, it's stitched together and then they put tape over it, or it'll be a liquid that has now dried and you can see that on the stitching and it might look like it's kind of a hardened gel now, like hot glue or something like that. But if you don't see anything but material and stitches going through it, then it needs to be seam sealed. And this is something to even look at on your rain gear, because some rain gear comes not seam sealed. Some companies will offer a seam sealing service extra on top of the price of the product, and then, you know, some won't offer that at all. They'll just already do it, and some won't do it at all. But you can get the stuff to seam seal yourself, but you want to make sure that you're getting the right product for the fabric that your shelter is made of. So that's something that, again, you can check with the manufacturer to find out what they recommend for seam sealing, or find out what that material is and then look up the exact product for that type of material. If you're hiking in micro spikes, is it stupid to not be carrying an ice axe? Does one go with the other? It really depends on the trail. It is not a necessity that just because you have micro spikes that you have to have an ice axe. You could be on a trail that's just iced over, but there aren't any real steep climbs. You're not on the edge of anything dangerous where you might have to self-arrest, and therefore micro spikes would be just so you're not slipping around on the ice while you're trying to walk down the trail. So for example, one day I day hiked from Newfound Gap to Charlie's Bunyan and back, and I needed micro spikes, but nowhere in that stretch did I need an ice axe, because again, I wasn't in an area where if I slipped and fell, I would have to self-arrest to save my life. And that's the purpose of an ice axe, is in that horrible emergency situation where you are falling down a steep slope and it's going to mean life or death unless you self-arrest, then that's what those are for. So just make sure that you research the trail that you're going on, and if you do find yourself approaching an area where you think that it might be necessary to self-arrest if you were to fall, if you do not have an ice axe, it would be a good idea to go ahead and turn it back around and head back to the trailhead. But of course, it would be best if you can find out ahead of time and know what you're getting yourself into before you get out there. Are you supposed to put the plastic cap back on the fuel canister for your stove? I feel the answer is yes, but for some reason I feel the need to ask anyway. So this person is referring to when you get a fuel canister for your stove, if you are cooking with a stove, and you are cooking with canister fuel instead of denatured alcohol or some other form of fuel. So there's a little plastic cover that goes on top of that to cover the threads and down into the hole there where your stove connects. And the question is, do you have to keep that? Is it important? And the answer is, I guess it depends. So I do not keep mine. I mean, that's something I throw away before I leave town. It just hasn't been necessary. I haven't needed it. I think probably what happened is one time I lost one somewhere in the depths of my pack and decided, I don't need this. And so from then on, I just kind of tossed it. But I do keep my fuel can inside my food pot and my stove and all of that in there to kind of help protect it while I'm hiking. But I think the main purpose of that cap probably is to protect the threads from getting messed up so that your stove won't stop threading on there properly. And then also to kind of protect anything, dust, debris, gravel, from getting down in the little hole on the top of it, because that could also mess it up or cause potentially fuel to spew out and whatnot. So it's definitely not a bad idea to keep it, but personally I do not, and I won't say that it's absolutely necessary. Does anybody use earplugs? I keep hearing about the insanely loud wind that keeps people awake all night. Would earplugs help? I personally do not like to wear earplugs. I carried them on the Appalachian Trail for a little while and didn't on any of the other trails. I like to be able to hear what's going on at night. I like to know what's outside my tent. That's just a personal preference. Now, there are folks who definitely do use earplugs when they sleep. It helps them feel like they're in a little bubble and they, are in their tent and safe and sound and it's quiet and they like it. I will say I did wear earplugs a couple of times in the hostels on the Appalachian Trail. Sometimes you end up in a bunk room with people who snore, and my only saving grace was earplugs, and sometimes that didn't even really help that much. Also, if you're going to be on the AT in shelters with people, I think earplugs help. When I'm out in my tent and I hear somebody snoring in the distance, that doesn't really bother me so much. Just when you're in the echo chamber of a bunk room or a shelter, that's when I've really found them to come in handy.
Next up, please explain to me how to use a sleeping bag liner. It seems like you get very tangled up in it. Yes, I definitely know the frustration of a sleeping bag liner, and I ditched mine some time ago. I haven't used one since my AT through hike, or maybe the PCT at the very beginning. One of the reasons was to save weight, but another reason, they just are very frustrating to me. So if you're using a sleeping bag liner, then there are really kind of two options that you're using it for. One is for warmth and the other is maybe for like cleanliness. So if it's for extra warmth, then I would just go out on a limb and say you're going to be way better off if you just get another sleeping bag that has a lower temperature rating so that you stay warm with just the sleeping bag. I know that not everybody wants to go out and shell out the cash to buy a whole new sleeping bag. So if you got what you got and you're just trying to make it work, then maybe invest in a better base layer so that, you know, you're basically wearing the sleeping bag liner, or put on an additional layer. That way you don't find yourself getting so tangled. But on the off chance that you are using it to help keep your sleeping bag cleaner on the inside and less wear and tear, or if you're just adamant, like, I really want to use a sleeping bag liner, there could be some modifications that maybe you could make to the inside of the sleeping bag and the outside of the liner, like stitching some little ties to the inside of the bag and outside of the liner that you could basically just knot together to help it kind of stay in place. Somebody else mentioned that maybe clothespins could help. And then there was another commenter who said, instead of trying to spin inside the liner that is inside the bag, they spin with the liner inside the bag, and that probably seems like your best option if you don't want to make any modifications. So if anyone else has creative solutions that they have come up with, please feel free to leave that in the comments below.
I have watched many vlogs of the AT and PCT and noticed many times that people who use a Garmin message device also wear a watch. The Garmin device or even your phone are the most accurate time devices you could need in almost any case. I smile when seeing someone trying to look at their watch at the same time their Garmin shows in the video showing the time. So aside from watches that are also fitness trackers, why wear a watch if you also carry a Garmin? So I assume that this person is probably talking about something like the inReach that does display time. But one example of where somebody might want to also carry a watch is if they want an alarm to wake up in the morning, but they want to keep their cell phone turned off to conserve battery. This is just one instance. There may be others, and sometimes people just like what is comfortable to them. So if in normal life they wear a watch because it's more convenient to just do that rather than pulling a cell phone out of their pocket and checking their time, or it's a fashion statement or whatever, there could be multiple reasons.
Since you have experience with the SOS button, what happens if you come upon a person that is experiencing an emergency and needs help? Do you press the button or not? Who is responsible for any cost to save another person's life? Well, I would hope that if I am dying, that somebody will push the button regardless, right? But I do understand the dilemma here. Like, you don't want to be stuck with 60 grand doing a good deed and no good deed goes unpunished. And, you know, you're stuck with that because somebody didn't take responsibility for it or they died. So anyway, from what I was able to gather online, poking around, as long as you don't falsely call, right? Like, you know, kids pranking calling 911, like as long as it's not a false alarm and you called for not an emergency, I don't know why anyone would do that, but then the person who search and rescue come to rescue, it is their financial responsibility to pay whatever costs are accrued with getting them out of the wilderness. And if you look on Garmin's website, they specifically state this, that if you have an inReach or Garmin device and you push the SOS button, then the person that is saved, rescued, is the one responsible for the costs. So if I see somebody who needs help, I'm gonna push the button. Do you see many/any hikers trading gear on the trail? I don't mean hiker boxes, but more like in campsites, where one may do trades with other hikers for things that they don't use but another will. Something like, I shouldn't have brought this blank, I don't really use it. I have definitely seen more food trading going on or food gifting. I have seen a hiker that might have an extra item, or maybe they have repair items or first aid items that another hiker might need, and so they gift those. But as far as like trading actual gear, or one hiker has something that they've realized is pointless to have and another one needing it, if one backpacker has deemed an item useless out on the trail, then chances are the other backpackers also would feel the same way. So yeah, more food than gear.
How do you know or find out what size pack you need? The best route, in my opinion, for figuring out what size pack you need is getting all of your other pieces of gear, taking them to an outdoors gear store and trying to fit that stuff in different size packs. Now, you don't typically need a 100-liter pack, for example, to do something like the Appalachian Trail or, you know, a shorter trip. Those are really if you're going out on like a big expedition for, say, over a week or so. Most outdoor stores are going to be fine with you bringing in your gear and trying to fit it into one of their packs, because you're probably not the first person who's ever done that. Next up is, have you ever seen a pack goat on trail, and which trails would allow them? I have seen several pack animals on trail, but I'm not sure about goats specifically. I do remember in the Wind River Range seeing some pack animals, and I did a little Googling and found that there are companies who have pack goats for that area. I'm sure a lot of the longer trails like the Pacific Crest Trail and Continental Divide Trail, where they allow horses, and really any trail that allows horses, probably allows other pack animals. With that said, I can't say that that is a definite blanket rule, and that if horses are allowed, goats are also allowed. You may have to contact that specific park or whatever body kind of governs that trail area. But I can say for sure on the Appalachian Trail that it's human foot traffic only, and horses, goats, etc. are not allowed. But anyway, yes, it does happen. The next question is it wise to test out your bear mace? I noticed mine have expiration dates and I just keep buying more. Right now I have 3 canisters that are technically expired, but I'm wondering if I can test them to see if they still function properly so I can keep them. That being said, how do you safely dispose of bear spray canisters so they don't end up exploding or being mishandled? It seems like it's better safe than sorry when it comes to minding the expiration date on bear mace. From what I read, it's actually the propellant that goes bad in the bear spray, not the spray itself. So you don't want that to go bad, because then you probably mash the button and just it kind of oozes out instead of, you know, doing what you need it to do in a situation where a bear is coming after you. So even if your can still feels heavy and you shake it and it sounds like, hey, this is still good, it may not function properly if it's past that expiration date. But to dispose of them, apparently the easiest way that I could find online is to actually empty the contents of the bear spray, and then the canister is fine to toss like it is. So you do get to at least practice using the bear spray, and to me, I feel like that's always a good idea. I've wanted to test out bear spray, but I never have. But at least if you're in that situation where you're having to use it, it's familiar to you going through that act of pulling it out and spraying. The same thing if you're gonna carry a firearm, you should be practiced with it. But I would caution you to be very attentive to what the breeze is doing the day you decide to test it out. And even still, spraying pepper spray, like regular pepper spray, I've done that in a situation before, and I did get a little bit of it in my face and on my hands, and so if it's on your hands, it can get in other places. So anyway, I would just use extreme caution with that and know that that is a risk you're taking. But if you don't want to fool with emptying the contents of the bear spray, totally get that. And you might check with your local law enforcement or fire station, because sometimes they have ways to dispose of those things, because police officers carry pepper spray, and if it's not used, it can be expired and they have to do something with it. Can you take bear spray into the US from Canada? I couldn't find anything definitive as far as the US saying that they do not permit people to bring bear spray across the Canadian-US border. However, I did find something from Canada saying that generally they don't allow any type of mace or pepper sprays because that's considered a weapon. But the exception is if it is intended for animals, and it specifically states that on the label. This information is from 2016, so I assume that that's current enough for now. Of course, if you take that risk and then they tell you no, then you've wasted $40. But because I'm not absolutely positive about bringing it from Canada into the US, then the safest route would be to order it on Amazon and have it delivered general delivery at a post office at your destination town. Or you could always buy it in the area that you're going to go. If you're going to be hiking in bear country, a lot of times gas stations, hardware stores, anything that's around a town that's known for backpacking and spending time outdoors, they're likely gonna have it. Now, with all of that said, I have successfully and without any issue carried my bear spray from the US into Canada and then from Canada to the US. And we told them at the border that we had it, but they didn't give us any problems with it at all. I don't even know that the US side asked us when we came from Canada back into the US. Now this is for driving across the border because flying with bear spray is a big no-no. I accidentally had my bear spray on me in an airport one time and I had to toss it when I went through security. I just forgot that it was in there, but they definitely caught it. Curious, how do you pack for plane travel? Do you carry on anything? Some people do carry on their pack. I like to have trekking poles, and I've never tried to carry trekking poles on the plane, but from what I know, that's a no-no. You have to check them. So I just put my pack and my trekking poles and everything in a bigger bag. I got a used duffel bag from Goodwill for about $5, so I felt good about reusing something. And then I put all my stuff in there, flew with it, and when I got to my destination, I just tossed the bag. It was kind of tattered and starting to tear up anyway. You could go with some sort of collapsible bag that's easy to stuff into a box and always mail it back to yourself if you choose to, or mail it to yourself general delivery at that post office if you aim to return to the same place and fly out of the same airport, and that way you can repack it again and then go back home with it. Another hiker mentioned that they talked to the airlines, and from what they explained to this hiker, they said that anything that's inside your luggage is covered by their loss or damage policy, but the luggage itself is not. So if you end up checking your pack just the way it is, or I guess even if you were to carry on, I don't know exactly how it might get damaged like that, but the bag itself is not protected. So if you're gonna check your stuff, then for sure I would recommend putting it all inside of a duffel. That way none of the straps or anything that's kind of flopping around gets hung up and ends up torn up and then not covered by the airlines. But this could vary among airlines, so I would say the safe way to go is to pack it all in a bigger duffel. But if you're gonna check the bag like it is, then I would check with the airlines and see what their policy is on that.
Next up, if I want to backpack domestically or internationally, but have to bring my own freeze-dried food for health reasons, can I put them in a carry-on, I assume on an airplane? Will they pass customs? Should I just mail them? Any help is appreciated. So I can't really speak for all international flights because I would assume that some of that might be dependent upon what country you're flying into. But as far as flights here in the US, domestic flights, you can go with food. I have gone with prepackaged backpacking freeze-dried food before. Now, it was like by Mountain House or, some brand. It wasn't something I made myself. But if you look on TSA's website, they have very specifically all sorts of different types of food. And even if the food is open, from what I could find on their website, it's fine. The only real restrictions and limitations for carry-on are if it's like a gel or liquid type substance, and then usually it's okay. You're just limited to like 3 ounces or less. Now for checked bags, it doesn't seem like there really is much of a limitation. So anyway, if you want to find specifically what you will be bringing, then I'm going to link to TSA's website where it talks about different foods in the video description. As far as the international flights, I would just check with the airlines that you're going to take for more information on that.
And next up is if you break down your food into freezer Ziploc bags, do you just toss those when you get to the next town, or do you rinse and reuse? There are some people who actually pour boiling water into freezer Ziploc bags and rehydrate in there and eat their meals out of that. So if you do that, I would just toss them. But if all you had in there was some freeze-dried food or dehydrated food, then I wouldn't have a problem with just saving those until I got to town, rinsing them out there, letting them dry, and reusing them again. And I definitely have done that because I didn't want to purchase new Ziploc bags every time I went to town, and also to reduce the amount of plastic that I'm using. Just make sure that if you do rinse and reuse, that the bags are completely dry before you put any more food in there, because you don't want it to get damp and then mold and get funky while it's in that Ziploc bag.
The next question is, have you ever hiked with cheese for multiple days, hard or soft cheese, and if so, did it spoil? Yes, I have hiked with cheese. I don't think I ever got to a point of it spoiling, But I will say that I prefer to carry cheese in the cooler temperatures, like early spring, late fall. It doesn't have to be like freezing cold outside, but I just don't love it when it's pretty warm outside and the cheese gets like super oily and slimy. That just is more questionable to me. But I will say, if it doesn't have mold on it, if it doesn't smell bad or taste bad, it's probably fine. With that said, this is not medical advice. So if you get sick from cheese that you carry on trail, it's your fault, not mine. But I have successfully taken cheese a lot of times, cheese sticks, cheddar blocks, you know, whatever. And it's a really nice addition to food or just a snack. But, you know, again, if I'm not seeing mold or it doesn't smell wonky, I'm going to use it.
When hiking with a bear canister, do you keep your food in it the whole time you're hiking with it, or only when camping at night? The purpose of a bear canister, like the purpose of a food bag, is to have some sort of receptacle to store your food while it's unattended, for example, while you are in camp and sleeping at night. That way bears don't learn to associate humans with food, because obviously that would be a bad thing, and when bears start to do that, they're often euthanized. Now, it is said that even when food bags are hung properly, in some areas bears have learned to harvest them, and then that leaves you in a bad situation because you're now in this potentially long stretch of trail with no food. So that's where sometimes requirements for a bear can comes in, because they have not yet learned how to break into a bear canister, at least from what I've heard. You would basically follow the same rules with your bear can as you would if you were hanging a bear bag. I personally like to have snacks easily accessible, usually in my hip belt while I'm hiking. That way I can munch while I'm moving down the trail. Other people, like my friend Perk, prefer to sit down and take designated breaks. So for him, it wouldn't be that big of a deal to keep his food, etc., in his food bag or his bear can. And the convenient thing about bear cans, if you strap them to the top of your pack, is that you don't have to go and open your whole pack and dig down in there to get access to food, because boom, it's right there on the top. So no, you are not required to keep your food in a bear can at all times just because you're in an area that requires you to carry a bear canister. I know I am supposed to hang all of my toiletries in my food bag when I'm hanging a bear bag at night, like toothpaste, bug spray, sunscreen, etc. But what about when I use those things during the day on my body? Am I supposed to wash that off before I climb in my tent at night? You could, but if you think about it, you're coming from civilization into the woods, probably really good smelling anyway. You've got fresh laundry detergent on your hiker clothes, shampoo in your hair, soap on your body. You might even put a little swipe of deodorant before you get started. Now, you could go through the trouble of using all unscented products before you hit the trail, and then washing before you get in your tent at night with unscented soap. But even still, you've probably, hopefully, brushed your teeth before you went to sleep at night, so you've got the scent of toothpaste in your mouth, or if you don't brush your teeth, then the smell of the food that you ate. So I really feel like that's just overkill, but if that's what helps somebody literally sleep at night, then they should go for it and do whatever makes them comfortable. You just want to make sure that you get the main source of those items out of your tent at night when you sleep, because they're going to be a lot more concentrated than the little bit you've got on you. If I'm having my time of the month, am I more likely to attract animals? Mainly worried about while sleeping. The only thing I could really find as far as any research on this topic was bears, and are they attracted to women more when they're menstruating?
The bears can smell the menstruation. Well, that's just great.
From what I read, bears were not attracted to the scent of women menstruating any more than the scent of anything else. As far as grizzly bears go, the response to menstrual odors has not been studied experimentally. With black bears, they did do some studies, and apparently the black bears just ignored the scent of menstrual odors. And then they also looked at some of the different bear attacks that have occurred, and they looked into the ones that were women, were they menstruating or not, and they couldn't find any kind of link between women on their periods and being attacked by bears. With that said, there are some precautions that you can take, you know, just in case, like wearing internal tampons instead of external pads. Use unscented feminine products and towelettes to clean yourself. Any of the used napkins or anything like that you want to store with your trash, and at night, hang it with your bear bag or however you store your food at night. Next up is, what do females do with their used sanitary napkins while backpacking? And the answer is, if they're doing it properly, then they will pack them out. My friend Riga used to put hers in an empty peanut butter jar so that it was kept separate from her other trash. That way, while she was sitting around a group cooking and had her gallon Ziploc bag, she didn't have to, have all of that used stuff in sight for everyone else to see. You could have like a separate Ziploc within your trash gallon size Ziploc bag if you wanted to. I mean, there are several different options, but the main thing is that you're packing them out and not burying them. I know in some areas, like along the Appalachian Trail, they allow burying toilet paper in the cat hole, but you don't want to put pads and tampons in the hole because it's going to take them a long time to break down, unlike toilet paper. So anyway, when it comes to sanitary napkins, pack them in, pack them out. Next question is, new type of female underpants for special days. Tried or tested, yay or nay? Thank you, by the way, did not want to create a post about that. So this is in reference to period panties. So when ladies are menstruating, it's basically underwear that acts in place of a tampon or a pad. I do not have personal experience with this. I had thought about trying it on the CDT and even the PCT, just never got around to it. But other people chimed in the forum, and the consensus is basically, if you have a heavy flow, it may not be the best line of defense of not making a mess, but it could potentially work for you as backup, or if you have low to moderate flow, it could be what you use in place of sanitary napkins, etc. Basically, what I gathered is for a day hike, it would be fine, again, if you have low to moderate flow. But as far as on an overnight trip, a weekend trip, a through hike, they tend to be a little bit heavy, and it seems that you would need several pair because you've got to rinse them and then wash them out and then allow them to dry after you've used them to, I guess, their max capacity or whatever the recommended time frame is for using them. I assume that would differ for each woman, but anyway, I think the idea of having to carry enough to wash and rinse out and then hang on your pack to dry, and then just the weight of them in general may not be the most convenient thing for an overnight backpacking trip. And then somebody else chimed in and said she loves them for day-to-day life, but as far as any kind of exercising, hiking, working out, she finds that when she sweats, they get kind of soaked with sweat. So she just didn't think that they were really that great for exercising in general, let alone backpacking. The next question is about undergarments or underclothes. Can they be cotton or should they be non-cotton, especially on long hikes? So for backpacking with cotton, it's a general rule of thumb that cotton kills, that you should not wear cotton while backpacking. This is especially true in colder months because cotton is known to hold in moisture. And if it's cold out, then you're hiking and sweating, then you stop, and now you've got this cold, damp clothing on you in cold temperatures. That can lead to hypothermia, which is never good and can lead to death. In warmer temperatures, it can still be problematic, but typically in another way. If you've got a garment holding in moisture, then you've got hotter temperatures, it can lead to chafing because things don't dry out quickly. So it's best to backpack with synthetic clothing because it does dry out much more quickly than cotton. So specifically with undergarments for active hiking or backpacking, I would say don't go with cotton. With that said, I have worn cotton on a backpacking trip, but I've worn it while I'm asleep. And this was in the hotter months where I just really wanted something that was light and breathable. So if you really miss having cotton undergarments, then I would say one application would be while you're camping at night, you're going to be sleeping, not walking around and sweating. Another application where you could wear cotton might be if you're backpacking in a hot, dry desert, because everything's going to dry out quickly there. The next question is, as a female multi-day hiker, is it acceptable to wear your underwear for multiple days? Yes, regardless of whether you are a male or a female, wearing your underwear multiple days on a backpacking trip is completely normal. And I would say that having a pair for each day of your backpacking trip is less normal than wearing one pair multiple days. So the way that I prefer to do this is I carry 2 pair of underwear with me. I'll wear one the first day, then I'll turn it inside out and wear it the second day. I know that the bacteria is probably still there and it doesn't matter turning it inside out, but I just prefer that. And then the third day I start with the second pair of underwear. And then while hiking on that third day, I will find some sort of water source to do some trail laundry and rinse out that pair of underwear really well, downstream from where people are collecting their water, mind you. And then I'll hang it on my pack to dry. So by the time I get to the 5th day, after wearing that second pair for 2 days, on day 5, I put on the first pair again that is now clean-ish and dry.
Underwear question. Wearing them one day right side out, next day inside out, doesn't it get your regular britches dirty? I wonder if it's worth the ounces to carry extra. Thoughts? I think this is in reference to me talking about how I wear my underwear one way, turn them inside out, wear them the other way, and then the third day I put on a new pair and wash the second pair and hang it on my pack to dry. So that system, you know, lasts me 4 days on 2 pair, but could more with doing some on-trail laundry. Anyway, to be honest, that it is kind of gross. And yes, I mean, the dirty side being on your shorts could get your shorts more dirty, but you're gonna have so much butt sweat that it's just really not gonna matter. And for me, I think it's more of a mental thing. So, you know, if it's worth it to you, this is something that's completely personal preference with almost everything in backpacking. You really just have to decide, is it worth it to you to be able to put on a clean pair of underwear every day? For me, it's not. For you, it definitely might be, and that's okay.
The next question is about trail laundry and how you go about doing that. If you hear a backpacker referring to trail laundry, they're probably talking about just rinsing their clothing out to kind of freshen it up before they get to a town to do proper laundry in a washing machine. So this can just simply be done like it sounds. Just rinse your clothes out and then hang dry them either on a limb in the sun, a rock, or maybe even on your pack while you continue hiking. Now, some people would argue that you should not rinse your clothes directly in the water source, but folks often go swimming on swimming holes or in creeks while they're hiking to freshen up. So in doing this, they're getting the same sweat and grime and butt funk and everything else in the water source. So my thoughts are, if you're gonna rinse your clothing directly in a water source, then you wanna make sure you're mindful that you're not doing it directly upstream of somebody who's trying to collect their water, because that's kind of gross. And also, if you're using any sort of pesticides like bug spray on you and your clothing, then I would definitely recommend staying out of the water source. Also, if you decide you wanna use a little bit of soap, even if you're using a biodegradable soap, you don't want to put that directly in the water source. So for those instances, I would definitely say to collect your water, go 100 feet from the source, and then do your laundry there. Do people pack bathing suits with them while backpacking or through hiking, or do they just go swimming in their hiking clothes, their undergarments, or in nothing? I think all of these have happened at some point. I'm sure that there is somebody who has gone backpacking and taken a bathing suit with them. But I would say, for the most part, from what I've seen on my through hikes, most hikers do not carry any kind of bathing suit. They'll just get out in the water in their hiker clothes, especially if those need a good washing too. I personally prefer to go in my hiking shorts and my sports bra. In a sports bra, you're not seeing more than you would in a bathing suit anyway. But there are certainly people who will just go in nothing, and especially if you get to a hot springs area, it seems a lot of those can be clothing optional. But even in towns, when I've stayed at a hotel that has a pool or a hot tub, a lot of them do say bathing suits only, but they know the hiker community is coming through and that we probably don't have bathing suits, and I've never had anybody complain if I'm sitting in a hot tub in my hiking shorts and a sports bra. But I guess I kind of just lied, because at the end of the Florida Trail, I did for a short period of time carry a bathing suit, because when I got to the beach down there for that last stretch, I knew I was going to be at the beach, and I wanted to have a bathing suit to wear at the southern terminus if I wanted to. So when we hit the beach, I did pick up a bathing suit and carry it for the last little bit of trail. But aside from that, I probably will never carry a bathing suit again. What about shorts versus yoga pants for women? This one is a little tough, because it's definitely going to be a personal preference thing, as is with most clothing and honestly most backpacking gear in general. But what I can do is say what I prefer and why in specific instances. Most of the time, if I'm going to be hiking in the late spring, summertime, and early fall, I like to hike in shorts. The reason I prefer shorts in the warmer months is because they help keep me cooler. The downside to shorts is they don't protect your legs as well as leggings will against things like rocks or thorns, and also bugs like ticks. Now, I will tell you that mosquitoes will jab right through those leggings and suck your blood anyway. Also, I've had less chafing in leggings than in shorts. I don't know, something about the material of my shorts. If it's way too humid or way too dry, then I'll get some irritation where the hem part of the shorts kind of rubs my thighs. But after some time, that ends up working itself out, which is why I've stuck with the shorts.
To update this one, I've actually all but quit wearing shorts in the backcountry. I like to wear leggings now, just to protect my skin from the sun a little bit more.
Now, if it's cold, I'm gonna be wearing leggings. I'm a very cold-natured person. So basically anytime early spring and before, or mid-fall and after, I'm probably gonna be in leggings. The biggest downside to leggings, other than they can be too warm sometimes in my opinion, is if you get a pair that starts getting kind of stretched out, or sometimes even with a new pair, if they don't grab enough, then you'll have this thing where they kind of shimmy down while you're walking, and it starts feeling like a saggy diaper back there, and you gotta try to pull them up. So you want to make sure you get a good pair that are gonna stay up, so you're not plagued with having to pull them up all the time or let your butt crack hang out. The next question is, have you seen many men wearing kilts on trail? I've heard that it's cooler to do so. Now, I don't know if he's referring to cooler as in the way it looks, or cooler as in breezier, but either way, yes, I have seen a handful of men who hike in kilts, and obviously I'm not talking about your traditional made out of wool and hand-stitched kilt, but something that mimics it, that's made out of a more synthetic, quick drying material and used in the world of athletics like backpacking, etc. I asked about this in a post on my Facebook page just to kind of get an idea of where folks are getting these athletic kilts, and several men suggested sportkilt.com, and then there was another fella who used a Mountain Hardwear kilt. So I'm sure there are quite a variety of different brands and specifications depending on what you're looking for. I've heard there are a couple of benefits to wearing a kilt on trail. First of all, the fact that yes, it is more breathable and breezier, so this can help reduce chafing, especially in addition to using something like a Gold Bond powder or Body Glide for anti-chafing. And then of course, it makes it easier to go to the bathroom without having to expose yourself quite as much. Now, there aren't only men wearing kilts, but there are women who are also wearing kilts or skirts, skorts, and dresses while they hike. One of the skirts that I've heard good things about from the ladies is the Purple Rain adventure skirt, but again, I know there are many brands out there and different styles. Apparently kilts and the like don't bind like shorts and pants when you're going up steep inclines, and also they're easy to dress and undress when you're in the closed confines of your shelter. Do you or anyone else notice a difference in your glutes after a few weeks on trail versus not hiking for a while? Basically, is hiking a good way to grow your glutes? I definitely notice after backpacking for a few weeks that my legs get stronger. So with strength, you've got to think there's going to be some growth. And I've never really done a whole lot of measurements of my body on a thru hike or before and after, but I have measured my calves and they did grow after a 6-month thru hike. I don't know how much difference you'd see just after a few weeks, but I think what a lot of hikers struggle with is getting enough protein on trail. So specifically if you're using backpacking to try to grow your glutes or any muscles for that matter, I think you should focus on making sure you're getting enough protein in your diet, and then also maybe at the end of the day mixing up some protein powder to feed your muscles. But on a side note, after 10,000 or more miles of backpacking, I still have cellulite, so I'm pretty sure that that's just going to be there forever. The next question is, how do you check for ticks in places that the sun don't shine? On the places that you can't see on yourself, you can ask other hikers to take a look for you. Now, of course, I understand there might be some areas that you don't want just everybody looking at, but I mean, on your back or in your waistband of your pants, you know, areas like that where somebody can take a quick look and can see better than you, then that's always nice. Now, if you just don't want anybody looking at you at all or feel weird asking somebody, I promise if you ask them, they'll probably be happy because then they'll ask you to return the favor. But if that just makes you uncomfortable, then it helps to have a mirror. I always carry a mirror brush combo with me, so you can check by, you know, looking at those areas, holding your mirror behind you and, you know, looking in the mirror. Also, just feeling. If you slowly rub your hand across your skin, then you should be able to feel at least any ticks of any decent size. But those little bitty guys can possibly be on your skin and you not feel them, so I do think it's good to have a mirror. Also, if you do feel one, it helps to have the mirror for removing it. But this is a lot easier in the daylight. If you're trying to do this in your tent with a headlamp, it can make it a little bit trickier, but I've still managed to get it done because I do typically night hike, and so when I get in my tent at night and I'm checking for ticks, it's usually dark. But I tend to check for ticks twice if I've been seeing them a pretty good bit. Once when I go to sleep at night, and the other when I wake up in the morning. And I know you're thinking, well, if you've been in your tent the whole night, why would you check for ticks again? But sometimes they can hang out on your pack or other gear that has brushed trees during the day and find their way to you for a midnight snack while you're sleeping at night. But trying to catch them within 24 hours is important, because if you catch them in that first 24-hour period, it really minimizes your chance for getting a tick-borne illness. Ooh, butt sweat questions. What about preventing chafing and wearing breathable pants? How do you keep the balance between butt breathing and keeping your legs warm? All right, so my first thought on this is most athletic clothing is going to be designed to wick away sweat and be breathable. But in the summertime, I'm wearing shorts. Some people wear pants. Again, most of it's designed to breathe. Now, in the colder months, I'm going to be sweating a lot less. So, you know, I kind of feel like as far as how you keep yourself warm and not sweat too much, that kind of comes with the temperature. If you are pouring sweat, then take a layer off, you know, and you'll cool off. As far as chafing goes, it's kind of like getting blisters. When you notice that there's a problem starting, you need to go ahead and nip it in the bud. Basically, make sure that your clothing fits properly. You can try some breeches, or, you know, wherever you're chafing, you can try clothing that doesn't have as many seams. You want to try to keep the area as clean as possible, and then you can do things to reduce friction, like wear body glide or use cornstarch, just something to where that skin on skin or clothing on skin friction is reduced. At night, if it's warmer, you can try to let everything air out while you sleep. Some people have even used diaper rash ointment. And all in all, when it comes down to it, if it's continuing to get worse, you know, you may just have to try swapping up your clothes, try going commando or different underwear, or it may boil down to you just need to take a day or so off in town and just let it heal up. On a thru hike, if you go into town for a resupply but you don't want to get a hotel for the night, what do you do about washing up? Do you just find a public restroom and do the best you can in a sink, or is there another option? Well, there actually are some other options. First, depending on where you're at, there may be community centers that allow you to shower for a donation or a certain fee, and I've even found churches that reach out to the hikers and allow things like that. And then sometimes there are hostels that, even if you're not getting a room for the night, they'll allow you to pay $5 or so for a shower, and if you want to do laundry, that might also be an option. And then there are trail angels, so you can always reach out depending on what trail you're through hiking. There may be a trail angel group specifically on Facebook for that trail. Sometimes towns will have a list of trail angels, so you could always hit up one of the trail angels and say, hey, is there a way that you would allow me to come and take a shower? A lot of times, if there is a list of trail angels, they'll have things that they'll offer next to their name, like rides, lodging, etc. But worst case, yes, you can definitely find a public restroom and do the best you can to clean up until you hit the next town. But make sure if you do that, that you don't leave the bathroom a mess, you get any mud or grit up that you deposit into the sink. On the same note of hygiene, the next question is, how often do you wash up on trail? This person says that they typically do the armpits and the tail once a day, but as far as everything else goes, do you just wait until you get to the next town stop? And this is going to be a personal thing. Everyone will be different. I know that there are people that don't worry about washing anything at all until they get to town, but for myself, I prefer to do the same thing, the armpits, the nether regions, and I like to rinse my feet if I can once a day, whether that's finding a cool source to soak them in, or even at camp if I've got some extra water that I can wash my feet off with. But baby wipes are a godsend in my opinion for doing a sponge bath on trail. And so when I find myself going number 2 in the woods, that's usually the time that I'll go on and give everything down there a good cleaning. Basically, I try to attend daily to the areas that could be problematic if they get too funky. Next, somebody asks, I would love to know how you keep your nether regions clean. When I went on a 10-day trip, I felt like no matter what I did, it still smelled so bad down there. So I'm just gonna be straight up. It's not gonna smell like roses while you're backpacking. Sometimes you just have to embrace the stink, but I mean, there are certainly things that you can do to try to be hygienic and not have any like actual health issues. So when I go number 2, I use baby wipes to clean up, just to try to get it as clean as possible. And I typically run a baby wipe over all of the essential parts, if you will, anyway, once a day or so. Also, to help prevent chafing, sometimes I use baby powder that's got cornstarch, not talc. In my underwear, I'll just sprinkle a little down there, and sometimes even in my armpits to help freshen up. I think using a bidet would be even better for going to the bathroom, and then even getting some sort of feminine cleaner for down there, some maybe soap and water. You don't want anything to cause issues, but just doing the best you can with a daily cleanse. At least you'll know you're keeping things at bay, any issues. But yeah, you're just not gonna smell fresh on trail. The next question is, do you ever come to a point where you just accept that you're a dirty, stinky hiker and you have to deal with it? And I think the answer is that depends on everybody. There may be some people who still aren't over it and they obsess with it while they're out on trail, but I think it depends on, you know, what type of hiking you're doing. If you're going out for shorter trips and you're doing shorter days during the day and spending more time in camp in the evenings or in the morning, you might like to take extra care and be more clean than the thru hiker who's going to be out there on a 6-month trip and is trying to do more miles during the day and is probably too exhausted to worry with too much when they get to camp. And also, I mean, there are some people who just don't have an issue with being the dirty, stinky hiker, and some who might not really ever get over that. But for myself, I've found the more years that I go backpacking, and certainly the length of my trip makes a difference and how much I obsess over being clean. But I think the main thing that's important is each individual person is covering their bases at least to the bare minimum, so they're not causing themselves issues out on the trail. You don't want to end up with really bad chafing in your nether regions or some other swampy stuff going on down there. And also foot care. Having trench foot or other types of foot funk is no fun out on the trail. So making sure that you've got at least a couple pairs of underwear and a couple pairs of socks where you can rotate those out while you're on trail. Maybe rinse a pair out after wearing it a day or two, let it air dry, put the other pair on, and then, you know, do the same thing after a couple of days. And that, again, is going to depend on the individual and what their body needs. But as long as you're covering those bases, then I feel like everything else is bonus. My sinuses are not so hot. How do you handle blowing your nose on trail? Do you just blow out one side while holding the other shut? This, my friends, is what we refer to as a snot rocket. And me personally, I can't say I never have snot rocketed, because certainly I have, but that's like a last resort for me. I prefer to find even a larger leaf, as long as I can identify that it's not poison, to blow my nose on if I'm just in a predicament. But if you find yourself blowing your nose several times throughout the day and you feel like this is going to be an issue for you, then I would highly recommend having a bandana or 2 or 3 with you. You can just tie your bandana to your shoulder strap so it's easily accessible and you don't drop it out of your hip belt pocket or something. And then, depending on the frequency in which you blow your nose, maybe you do some trail laundry, rinse it out somewhere, and then hang it on your pack to dry, and you can always pull out your other dry bandana. That way you don't end up causing your nose some like chafing and soreness, or it gets raw from rubbing it with a wet bandana. And then you can just keep rotating those out as you are on your backpacking trip. The next question is, do people, and this person asked specifically, do I shave on trail? And I will say this, I think that shaving is a personal thing for men and women. If they want to shave on trail, great. If they don't want to shave on trail, great. Not shaving and having hair on your body is a natural thing because it grows there. But also, if you find yourself wanting to shave while you're out on trail, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I've seen people online, especially women, shame one another for a woman wanting to shave while she's out on trail. And to me, it's your body, and whatever makes you comfortable and happy, that's what you should do. So for me personally, when I started my thru hike of the Appalachian Trail, I did carry a razor with me, and I would shave my armpits sometimes in my tent in the morning before I would go hiking. Now, I'm one of those weird people that can dry shave and it doesn't bother me, but I know that there are people who cannot do that. So you could always carry something like Dr. Bronner's soap with you and lather up and do that out on trail if you wanted to, or maybe even some lotion would work. But you definitely don't want to be getting in the water sources directly and lathering up and shaving there. So make sure you're 200 feet from the water sources. After a couple of weeks, I decided I didn't want to fool with that out on trail. So I would shave when I got into town for my resupply. Sometimes I'd carry a razor with me. Sometimes I'd just purchase a disposable one in the town somewhere and use it until, you know, it's time to get a new one. And that's pretty much what I still do. If I'm on a smaller hike, a week or less, I just don't worry about it. I don't carry one with me. And if I'm on a hike long enough that I'll have to resupply, then again, I either take one with me or get it while I'm in town. Both things are possible. Both things are okay. It really depends on the personal preference of the hiker.
Next up is, what is the best or easiest way to pack toothpaste? Just as a travel size tube? I'm picky and the brand flavor I use isn't available in travel size. So I actually saw one person who replied to this question. What they do is they use their normal preferred brand of toothpaste that comes in a big tube up until the point where it has approximately how much a travel size tube of toothpaste would have in it, and then they put it with their gear to be used on their next backpacking trip. So they just do this every time they get a new tube. It's almost used up, they put it with their backpacking gear. Now, you would still have some excess of container or plastic, so it would be a little bit heavier than a travel size tube, I would assume, but it's still gonna be more lightweight than carrying a big old tube of toothpaste. Another option is dehydrating some toothpaste, your preferred brand, and making toothpaste dots. I've never done this myself, but I saw a tutorial video where somebody did, and they put out parchment paper, some little dots of toothpaste, and set it to dehydrate on a lowish temperature for 10 hours or so. I also saw on a website where somebody put some little dabs of toothpaste on like a paper plate and just let it go until it dried. So you could dehydrate, you could air dry, but it seemed like the consensus was that some brands don't dry out as well as others, so you'll just have to see how yours does with that. Of course, there are also companies who sell toothpaste dots or tabs, and you can find them on the Garage Grown Gear's website, but I assume they're going to be pretty limited on the different brands and flavors that they have. So if you're not so picky as to buy toothpaste tabs from this website, then you might be best just going with whatever trial size of toothpaste
that you can find. How about toothpaste waste? I've seen a few different vlogs now where hikers are walking on the AT brushing their teeth. Where are they spitting that out so as not to attract critters, or because it's on trail and not at camp, is it okay? This is one of those things that I've always just tried to do my best with. You should, of course, avoid spitting toothpaste spit around campsites, around the trail, and at water sources. And then also, as far as what toothpaste to use, try to avoid anything that has like little scrubbers or beads in it. But I've heard it said that the proper way to do this is to walk away from everything kind of out in the middle of nothing, and you just try to spit and spew it as much as possible. So it's almost like if you're broadcasting your spit in a mist, that it's like dilution is the solution to pollution. You know, you've kind of spread it as thinly as possible to not have just one big wad in one spot. If you sleep in a hammock, how do you change your clothes in privacy? Privacy? What is privacy on the trail? I'm just kidding. This is actually a pretty good question, one that I did not consider before deciding to make a rain fly out of clear plastic painter's drop cloth to use over the hammock that I started with on the Appalachian Trail, which in itself was just kind of a mess of a setup. So I managed to just change while I was in my hammock. You know, I would just pull my change of clothes in there with me and kind of, you know, curl up like a burrito in the hammock and do the best I could. That's not the most comfortable or easy way to do it. So some of the hammockers in the forum said that what they do is they either stake their tarp or rain fly real close to the ground on one side so they've got a bit of privacy. And some others said that they'll just drop one side of the tarp while they're changing in the evening or in the morning to allow for a little bit more privacy. Either way, if you've got folks camping around you, I mean, at any given time somebody could cut off through the woods to go hang their food bag or to go use the restroom. So it might be a good idea that if there are people within close proximity, you could just say to them like, hey guys, I gotta change real quick. If you don't mind, don't come over here unless you wanna see the full moon in the daylight. After a day of hiking in the rain and you get to a shelter and it's still raining outside and there are other folks in the shelter, you get in there, start setting up, how do you change out of your wet clothing to the dry clothes that you want to sleep in that night without everybody seeing you? Some of the roofs on shelters create kind of a little overhang, so you could announce to the shelter, and I'm telling you, if you've got shyness about this, it will go away, because you would rather announce it than somebody accidentally see you, or at least I would. So I would just announce to the shelter, hey, I'm gonna go to the side of the shelter right over here and change my clothes, so unless you wanna see, you know, a full moon, then don't step to the side of the shelter right now. But if you're in a situation where you're gonna get rained on, you know, regardless of where you are outside of the shelter, then you can ask somebody, if you've met a hiking friend along the way or you got a hiking buddy already with you, to hold up a sleeping bag in the corner of the shelter so that you can change. My friend Riga and I did that for one another on the AT. So it's like, hey everybody, I'm fixing to change in the corner here. So if everybody could just look that way, and then hopefully your friend will hold up the sleeping bag and turn their head and let you do your business there behind your quilt or sleeping bag. Also, you can set up your sleeping pad and sit on top of that and just kind of drape your quilt or sleeping bag over the top of you and change under it while you're sitting under there. And I mean, most people will have the decency to know that you're, you know, trying to change. I've laid flat on mine before and draped mine over me and pulled my britches down and done all of what I needed to do. Of course, with that method, you want to make sure that you're not getting what's going to keep you warm that night, your quilt or sleeping bag soaked from your wet clothes, so you got to be kind of careful. Also, you can do this in the corner of your shelter by yourself if you don't have a partner. Just again, announce to everybody, hey, I'm going to change, nobody look, and make sure you say it first, because as soon as you say, hey, don't look, everybody's going to look, and then they're like, oh yeah, she said don't look, and then they'll turn. But anyway, so you can go to the corner, turn your back to everybody if you're a lady and you don't want to show your lady bits to the world. Take your shirt off and sports bra. Again, you got your back to everybody, so at most they'll see a naked back. Put on your dry top and then turn back around and face everybody, and you can take your quilt or sleeping bag and just kind of tuck it under your armpit so it's hanging down in front of you, and then pull your britches off, shimmy them off, and then put the dry ones on and voila, you now are warm and dry.
When you get to a camp area near trail with a tent, do you set up with the door facing the trail or facing away? I'm nervous to have the tent door facing away because I could get snuck up on, but I'm also nervous to set up facing the trail because of changing and feeling exposed. Like, get out of my head, because I have thought this exact thing before. But the truth is, it really doesn't matter how you set up. If somebody wants to sneak up on you, then even if your vestibule is facing the trail, then before they walk down the trail, they could just get off trail and sneak up on the back side of your tent anyway, not to freak you out. But I'm just saying, if somebody wants to like get you, then they can find a way to do it regardless of how your tent is oriented. And it's not like your tent is, you know, a super secured Fort Knox. I think that there are better things that you could do to prevent somebody from like sneaking up, or to make it more noticeable that somebody's approaching. Maybe we should say that so that we're not freaking ourselves out. But like setting up way off trail to where your tent is not super visible, or setting up where there are like leaves or a bunch of twigs around so you can actually hear. I mean, it's pretty noisy if something or somebody is stepping on twigs and leaves. And as far as changing, as long as you close your vestibule, then, you know, somebody shouldn't be able to see you anyway. And I mean, I don't know, once you're out there for a while, your ears just get kind of tuned into what's going on. So I feel like most of the time you hear folks approaching anyway, so you could close it real quick if you just really want to leave it open. But the way that I orient my tent, I have a double vestibule, so I've got one on either side. So normally I'll face one near the trail and one away from it. And then if I feel like being sociable, then I'll leave the vestibule open on the trail side. If I'm not really feeling sociable, then I'll leave that one closed and open up the other one. Or based on the view, if I can get a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset, then I might be more likely to open my doors in those directions.
Are all hikers super brave about sleeping alone in huts and in the woods at night? Or are there more people out there like me who have severe anxiety about sleeping alone or around people you don't know / trust on trail? The first night I was on the Appalachian Trail in Springer Mountain Shelter, I slept on the top floor with a complete stranger. There were other people in the shelter down below, but I thought it was the strangest thing in the world to be in that place with all of those strange people, but especially the one guy that I shared the top floor with. I mean, it was just like, this is not normal. This is very strange. Now fast forward to like New Jersey or New York. I had been night hiking one night, and I got to this shelter at like 1 a.m. And yes, I know that that's not the greatest shelter etiquette, but I was very quiet sneaking up, and I remember seeing people asleep in there, and there was one opening, like one little sliver, you know, definitely enough space. It wasn't like I was cuddling up to somebody, but I laid my sleeping pad there, and I kind of shimmied up in there, and I said, you know, we all kind of slept in there like a litter of puppies. And in the morning you wake up and it's like, oh, hey, Waldo, you know, oh, hey, so-and-so. And you end up knowing a lot of the folks because you've been hiking around them. And, you know, I remember thinking to myself that night, who am I? Like, who is this person that just shimmied up in here with a bunch of strangers and really didn't think much of it? But the truth is, that's just kind of how the trail works. And you do become more confident in yourself, and you do get to know the people around you, and you do realize that it's just kind of the way that the trail culture is. But anyway, no, everyone is not brave when they start out. I certainly was not brave. I was freaking out laying there the first night in Springer Mountain Shelter thinking, what have I gotten myself into? So it's totally normal to think it's strange to sleep around strangers, but it's strange how that later becomes totally normal. Does the eerie feeling of being outdoors fade? Yes, I think for some people it might take a bit longer than others. For myself, I grew up playing hide and seek in the woods, and as I got older I would go dirt road riding. I would sit out on dirt roads and study for final exams because I didn't have the distractions of being in the library or, you know, at the computer lab at school. So I spent a lot of time outdoors growing up. For somebody who did not, I could see how things could be a little bit more eerie, especially at night when you're backpacking alone and you don't have the luxury of just hopping in a vehicle and going somewhere if you choose to. However, I think that it could be compared to maybe the nervousness of starting a new job or anything where you're putting yourself into a new situation where you're not familiar with it. And eventually over time it becomes very, very normal. And you thought, why was I ever nervous about this in the first place? And for myself, that's kind of how backpacking got, and especially camping alone, it just became like second nature to me. I do think it's important for people to continue to put themselves in situations where they are uncomfortable, not necessarily a dangerous situation, but whether that's speaking in front of a group or learning a new skill, but just kind of putting ourselves out there and getting comfortable with the idea of being uncomfortable, because I think that in those situations we grow the most.
Anyone ever have a Bigfoot encounter? Personally, no. After 10,000 plus miles of hiking in the woods, I have never seen nor heard anything strange or that I at least attributed to being a Bigfoot, or seen tracks or doo-doo that I couldn't identify. And it seems like a lot of people are actually surprised by that, because I get asked this question a lot. But nowadays I hike with a trail cam, so he's gonna have to be super sneaky to evade me going forward. But I'm gonna be real honest, if I were to play back that trail cam and saw a Bigfoot, I would crap my pants. But according to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, there have been either sightings or clues that a Bigfoot has been spotted on or near the Triple Crown trails. You can poke around on their database and see whether it was an actual sighting or just some sort of indication that a Bigfoot had been in the area. And it's kind of cool because they go into detail on these things, like who the person was that reported the sighting and how credible they may have sounded and like what they do for a living. But anyway, I just found several examples on or near the Triple Crown trails, so I'm sure if you included all of the trails in the United States that are used for hiking, there would be a whole lot more. But again, personally, no.
Next, I don't know if this is a silly question, but I've been seeing a lot of videos about people talking about the Appalachian Mountains at night and the creepy things they have seen or heard. Did you ever experience anything like that on trail? I've been asked this question several times, and the truth is no. I didn't see anything spooky or creepy while I was on the Appalachian Trail, and I expected with how much history is in those mountains that they might have been haunted and I might have had some kind of experience like that, but I honestly did not. And I thought maybe on the Arizona Trail, because there have been a lot of alien encounters in Arizona, that I might see, a little green dude poke from around a tree or something, but that never happened either. Maybe it's just me.
What is the risk of stumbling across a yellow jacket nest and being stung? In all of my thru hikes, I have been stung, I believe, twice. I didn't see for sure what it was either time, but it definitely hurt bad enough that I feel like it could have been a yellow jacket or some kind of wasp. Now, I understand with being outside, it seems like, okay, there's this big risk to be stung all the time. And I mean, I guess technically there is, but it's just not something that probably happens as much as you think it might. But of course, if you're severely allergic, then I would recommend having an EpiPen with you just in case.
Can snakes go into a privy? Yes. Although I have never personally seen one in all of the privies that I've scoped out in the wilderness. I have seen mice in there though, and since mice are sometimes snake food, then, certainly a snake might go up in there to get a mouse nest or whatever. But I mean, at the end of the day, when you go in a privy, you should be cautious, look around, look into the hole, just to make sure you don't see any sort of threat immediately, because you are out in the wilderness. And one thing that people might not think about a lot is wasps. I have seen my fair share of wasps in privies, and I will decide to go dig a cat hole instead. The next commenter asks, this is more for the PCT and CDT, but how do you cope when there are 20 to 30 mile water carries and the one you come to is polluted, like there's a critter carcass in it, and I have had that happen twice before. How do you manage to stave off the dehydration issue? So I have backup ways on me to treat water. Some are more convenient than others. Like, for example, I usually have a stove that I cook food on. So I have stove and fuel. I can boil the water, let it cool. That's an important step. And then filter it. That way you kill whatever's in there with the boiling it for sure. And well, except for like,
chemicals and things like that. But then you filter it. And so with that double treatment, you know, I feel pretty good about it. There are also chemical treatments. It's not a bad idea to have some of those in your pack just in case. So like aqua mira or bleach drops, just some other way to, you know, chemically treat it and then filter it. It is still something that you have to get over mentally, that you're drinking like dead animal water. But like, if you think about it, all water has had doo-doo and pee-pee in it. Like the water cycle continues, you know? So, while it is something that you kind of have to mentally overcome, having drink mix packets to help flavor the water can help you forget about that. So you're not like, oh, does this water taste weird? Am I imagining things? You know, whatever. I try not, as for the other part of your question, staving off the dehydration, I try not to be in that situation. That's why I want to have a way to treat the water. But if I just am absolutely not going to drink it, or if, you know, it's a situation where the source was running it, now it's not, you know, just having the water that you have, like taking small sips, can help your mouth not feel so extremely dry. You know, you could argue that it's better to just go ahead and drink a good bit of it at one time, but like, I don't want my mouth to be dry. And so I'm going to take little sips until I get to my next source. And then also having some kind of hard candy can help, you know, prevent your mouth from feeling dry. And then of course, chapstick to help moisten your lips. But yeah, I don't want to be in that situation, especially in a more desertous type trail like the PCT or CDT.
How do you do river crossings? Do you just walk right across with your shoes on? How easily do they dry? Do you take your shoes off and try to dry your feet? And what do you do if the water crossing is deep and your clothes get wet? For the situation of how to cross a river and what footwear to wear, I really think it depends on two different factors. One, how many water crossings are we talking about in a given day? And two, how blister prone is the individual? Me personally, I'm not very blister prone, so regardless if I have one river crossing or 20, I'm probably just going to plow on through, because the footwear combination that I use, which is trail runners that are very breathable and a thin merino wool sock that is wicking moisture away from my skin anyway, then I don't really find any discomfort in having my feet wet. In fact, if it's hot outside, then it's kind of refreshing. And if you think about it, you're going to deal with the situation of having wet feet if you're backpacking for very long in a downpour. Also, I don't carry additional footwear. I don't use camp shoes, so I don't have an option of putting something else on. I have crossed a river barefooted before when it was freezing cold outside and I didn't want to have wet feet and be freezing cold. I don't really recommend that though, because you could easily slice your foot open on a rock and need stitches and be in the middle of the wilderness. So I'm not saying that you should do that, but I'm just saying I have done it before. But there are individuals who are extremely blister prone, and if they've only got a handful of crossings in a day, then it's worth it to them to switch out to water shoes or sandals or something else to do the crossing in, and then stop on the other side and do the switcheroo again. A word on sandals. For me personally, I found that my foot slides around in the sandal, so I don't feel as stable crossing in sandals as I do in my trail runners. Now, there are some people who backpack all the time in sandals that would probably disagree with me, so it really depends on the individual, because all of us have different feet. Now, there are areas where it might not matter how blister prone you are if you're crossing water nonstop, like for example the Gila River area on the Continental Divide Trail in New Mexico. We crossed the Gila River over 100 times in a 2-day period. So I wouldn't have cared how blister prone I was. There was no way I could get through there in a reasonable amount of time if I had to stop at every water crossing. So for those instances, it's not a bad idea to take a break every couple of hours or so and maybe switch out your socks. If you're blister prone, you might want to carry several pairs of socks if you know your feet are going to be wet a good bit. And you can put your shoes and insoles on a rock in the sun and let them dry out a little bit. And then just the changing of socks and having your feet dry for just a little while can really help you a lot. As far as your clothes getting wet while you're hiking, you should be wearing something that you're not really worried about getting wet anyway, because it could rain, so you could get wet from that. And certainly if you're doing a water crossing and you fall in, you want to make sure that you're wearing something it's not detrimental if it does get wet. I always recommend, especially if you're backpacking in cooler temperatures, that you have something warm and dry to put on once you get to camp. That way, if you do get wet during the day from it raining or a river crossing, then you've got something that you can be dry in your sleeping bag, so you don't have to worry about hypothermia. And if it's pretty cold outside, but you're not ready to stop for the day, and now you've gotten wet and you're kind of uncomfortable, if there's no chance of raining and you're not gonna have to do another river crossing, you could put on your nighttime clothes. That's getting a little risky, especially because you don't want to end up sweaty in your clothing and then get in your sleeping bag. That's a good way to also get hypothermia. Another option is you could put on your rain gear on top of your wet clothing. At least it's another layer to try to trap some heat in. And if you're miserable, uncomfortable, or you're concerned that your body temperature is getting too low, then of course stop as soon as you can and put on that extra set of warm, dry clothing.
The next question is, I never sleep much before a big hike. Always thinking I may have forgotten something I must have with me. I'm really excited on day 1, but tired by day 2 when lack of sleep pops up. What do I do? I wish I had a good answer for you on this. I find myself in the same boat. I think a lot of my issue before backpacking trips has been lack of organization and procrastination, which was also probably due to lack of organization. I have remedied that, and I actually just did a video on how I have organized all of my gear. So I hope that that's going to help me going forward to actually get my packing done ahead of time so I can go to sleep at a decent time the night before, or at least lay in the bed and try to go to sleep. And of course, I don't know your exact situation, but I think if you can pack ahead of time, like kind of well ahead of time, and then you've got a chance to go back through everything maybe 2 or 3 times to know that you have it all, would be useful. And while you're going through all of it, if you actually have a list printed out and maybe even laminated if you want to get real crazy with it, so you can mark off each thing so you really make sure it's all there, then I don't know, I guess having that peace of mind of making the list and checking it twice could help. And then maybe the day before your trip, instead of rushing around and packing up stuff, you can do something completely relaxing instead of rushing around getting ready for that backpacking trip or checking the list 12 times. But anyway, if all else fails and nothing helps, it's completely normal to be anxious and nervous before a backpacking trip, because you're going from the comforts of everyday life to throwing yourself out in the woods and hoping you got what you need. So I think that that's normal, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Do many married people go on a thru hike without their spouses? Yes, I have met several married people who were solo hiking. Some of the spouses are able to follow in an RV and kind of help them out along the way. I've also met some people whose spouses weren't able to do all of that because they had a full-time job back at home, but they were able to take some vacation days and meet their spouse on the trail somewhere, and they either took a mini vacation in a town while the hiker took a few zeros, or something to that effect. I even met some people who started early enough to give themselves time to go home for a family event or just a visit home. I feel like that could be a little more dangerous, because if you're really, really missing your family and you go home for a visit, then you might end up staying there, because it could be real easy to get back home and say, I've missed everybody and I'm real comfortable, but you know, then maybe you got what you needed out of the hike anyway. I would say though that having a supportive spouse would definitely be very important, because you're gonna have days where you may not have service and might not be able to communicate unless you have a GPS device that allows you to do so. But I think being able to plan some meetups and communicate as much as possible makes for a successful trip, even for folks who are married whose spouses cannot join them.
My wife can't backpack, and I feel guilty going on longer thru hikes. She supports my passions. What can I do to support her while I'm away? This is a really sweet and thoughtful question. First of all, I think that it's always good if somebody's showing you kindness to reciprocate. So in the future, if she has plans to maybe go on a girls' trip or do whatever her thing is, then definitely encouraging that, and particularly if she can go do something like that and stay busy while you're away, then that would be great. But some other things you can do for the duration of your thru hike is
Send her postcards from different town stops and resupplies. It doesn't take but just a minute to write a sweet message. You can get some stamps to carry with you from the post office, and a lot of these different businesses will send your outgoing mail. And then she feels like, you know, she can kind of follow you along the way. One of my friends, Dibs, pressed flowers that he would find on the ground in a book, and then he mailed a love letter with pressed flowers to his girlfriend at different points along the trail. And I think little things like this can mean so much because it's showing that even though you're out there living your dream, you're still thinking of her. You can do little things like order her delivery one night. If she's talking about like, man, I don't feel like cooking tonight, you know, we'll say don't, and I've got a surprise for you in a minute, you know, and you order her some delivery food or send her flowers occasionally if she likes that kind of thing. And another idea that I feel like is kind of a home run for a dude to do for a chick is to send her a coordinate bracelet of where y'all first met or a place that is special to y'all. There are different companies that do this online. They will specifically pick the coordinates that you prefer, and with some of them you can even put a little message on the back part of the little piece that has the coordinates. But I don't know, if anybody else has ideas about this, please leave them in the comments. Do many women go solo backpacking? And the lady who specifically asked this said that she had intended to go out on a through hike of the Appalachian Trail and delayed it because she couldn't find a hiking partner to go with her. She has since decided that she no longer wants to wait, and she wanted to know if it's more or less fair to tell her family that it's pretty safe out there and that they don't have anything to worry about. And the answer is yes. There are a lot of women every year who go on a solo through hike of the more popular trails like the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail. So the truth is that you can head out there on a solo trip, but you're not actually going to be alone most of the time unless you choose to be. Because there are so many people out there, chances are, even if you're not actively hiking with somebody during the day, you're going to have folks who are looking out for you. As far as safety goes, yes, there have been murders on the Appalachian Trail, but relative to any other place in the US where 3 to 4 million people per year touch that particular area, the Appalachian Trail, in my opinion, is relatively safe to go for solo travel as a female. Now, if you're a woman or a man who is nervous about going on a solo backpacking trip and you don't have any friends who are interested in going, then you can check out resources like meetup.com for your area. They may have groups that go out together, and then you can get more confident in your abilities before you go on a solo through hike. Also, there may be Facebook pages and groups for your particular area where you can meet folks who go out hiking and backpacking. And then you can start off your first solo trip just something short and close to home, maybe even a mile in from the vehicle, stay the night, and a mile out until you build up to the idea of being able to do a through hike if that's something that you desire and you don't have anybody to go with you. For you ladies who are a bit nervous about going on a solo backpacking trip, you should check out the group on Facebook, All Women, All Trails. There is a really good base there of women who are encouraging to one another, and some of them have recently been on solo backpacking trips and can probably share some tips that they learned about their experiences. As a plus size woman, I'm scared of getting into too intense a trips too fast because everyone I want to go with is in much better shape than I am. But I'm also scared of going by myself for safety. How would I go about finding hikes, trips that are good for the most beginners of us? How do I keep myself safe on those more frequented trails that I have found that are easier? Do you deal with anxiety over safety when alone or know others that do? How do they/you deal with it? So first things first, I just want to say that to be a backpacker, you don't have to do multi-day trips. You don't even have to do more than a mile if you want to. So to officially be a backpacker, you put everything that you need in your pack, walk a mile, stay the night, and come back. And I mean, I guess it could even be a half a mile or a quarter of a mile, but I'm just saying it doesn't have to be a big long distance. As far as finding people to go with though, I kind of want to focus on that for this video. I actually had a patron from Patreon ask me almost this exact set of questions not long ago, and I suggested to her to check out her local backpacking group. And she's like, I did, but they do way more miles than I'm capable of doing at this time. And I feel that because I slowly ease into making bigger miles when I start a through hike. I'm not somebody who can bust out the gate going 12 miles per day. I just can't do it. So I suggested to her to reach out to the local group, and most places have a local backpacking group, even if it's not 10 minutes down the road. It might be an hour away at the biggest city near you, but have them make a post or organize hikers that can only do whatever you can do. If that's 5 miles or less, if that's 3 miles per day, then see if there's interest in doing one of those more slow-paced trips for people who aren't able to do those higher mile trips. And I think that there probably are people who would be interested in something like that. Even if it's not physical limitation, I think there are people who would find interest in that because they enjoy the camping side of it more and the socializing side. But a local backpacking group that you could find through Google, Facebook, etc., would have knowledge of the easiest trails in the area to do these trips, and probably more information about safety on those specific trails. Any bra or backpack suggestion for girls with larger chests, like really larger? A 36GH to be exact. Need support without wires and not squished flat. And some packs I've tried are definitely not friendly to the girls. So because I'm not as well endowed as some other backpacking ladies, I put this question out there on a post to get some feedback. For the bra side of things, there were several recommendations, but the main brand that was voted on was the SheFit brand. There are different fits and levels of compression, so each individual can adjust things to suit them and their needs. But some other brands that were thrown out there are Free Label, Glamorize, and Lunaire. Some of the ladies who commented said that the best thing that they ever did was have a breast reduction and lift done, but I understand that's not an option for everybody. As far as the packs go, the consensus was the ULA brand. There were different models that these ladies used, but apparently what they liked the best about ULA is the option for the S-curve shoulder straps, because it just works best for a curvy chest.
Any recommended books to read when camping, or maybe any film downloads other than the trail guides / maps? Yeah, nobody wants to look at those things. I'm just kidding. I do check them every night before the next day of hiking. But I like to personally, I mean, this is going to be personal preference, I like to read things that are not about backpacking. However, adventure books can still be cool while you're out on an adventure. So for example, when I was through hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and I was in the Sierra section where you're going over mountain passes and I was in a lot of snow because it was a high snow year, I happened to listen to The Lord of the Rings. And I remember Sam getting on my ever-loving nerves, whining about the snow and going over mountain passes and whatever, being a big baby. But it just, one, felt nice to have like people kind of going through a similar treacherous journey, but it just made it a little bit more intense, you know, that I'm doing this thing that I'm also hearing about, and I don't know, probably made the book, you know, even more enjoyable as you're kind of acting out some of the same type things, if that makes sense, without being too weird. I also like to read a lot about longevity and health and, you know, mark down some things that I hear about that I want to research more or I want to try doing for myself to improve my health. So those are personal preferences. And then at night in my tent, I like to watch some Netflix. I'll watch a movie or, I mean, usually murder documentaries or comedies. But it is nice to just have something to wind down with at the end of the day, especially if you're on a trail that doesn't have a lot of people on it. And there are some folks out there who like to act like they are holier than thou because they are purists when it comes to partaking in nature, and they only listen to nature sounds and they only allow their eyes to gaze upon nature things. But if you're on a through hike for 2,000 plus miles, or even if you're on a weekend trip and you want to listen to an audiobook or a podcast, or you want to read a book, or you want to watch some Netflix in your tent, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And those people put their britches on the same way you do, and you know, they're not any better. So enjoy nature once again the way that you feel compelled to do so. And yeah, as long as you're mindful about other people. You're not listening to music out loud or, Netflix in your tent out loud. Just be safe and considerate about it. Next up, I'm curious why thru hikers walk so many miles every day and get done quickly. Isn't the purpose to get out in nature and see stuff? Why not slow down and take a little longer? Well, the purpose of nature is whatever the person who is going out in nature intends to do, right? Like, they get to come up with what their purpose is. There's not like one universal purpose of being out in nature. Some people like to get out there and camp. They don't even want to hike. They want to sit and camp and take it real slow in one spot and watch how things change around them. And that's okay too. Some people want to get out and see what their body is capable of physically while being out in nature and enjoying the fresh air and the trees. You've got people who are doing fastest known times and breaking records for running the trail. So I would argue that aside from being a FKT or fastest known time where you're running, going 1 mile per hour versus 4 miles per hour, what you might miss is probably, marginally different. But again, it's just how you want to enjoy nature. And that's one of the greatest things about nature is you can enjoy it however you want to. And that is the purpose.
The next question is, I'm only able to do day hikes. Am I looked down upon by the distance hikers? I feel like most people who like to go out in nature and spend time in the woods don't really care what other people are doing there. They're not usually interrogating folks or, judging people about what they're doing because they're so busy there spending their own time in nature and enjoying themselves. But of course, I can't speak for everyone, and there are some jerk kids who grow up to be jerk adults who might look down upon you, but who cares what they think? As long as you're getting out there in the capacity that you can and you're enjoying nature, then I think you're making yourself a better person. So I wouldn't worry about that, and I'd just keep at it. How do people find time to take several months or weeks to go do hobbies such as hiking and biking? Like, what about work? I feel like this is a case-by-case thing, but I only get 1 day off a week and would love to go for longer hikes. So it is a case-by-case basis for sure, but I think the main thing is that people who live lifestyles where they're out adventuring a lot, that is life to them. Like, they so strongly desire to be out backpacking, biking, traveling, etc., that they kind of build their life around that. Now, with that comes for sure some serious sacrifice. So I don't think that all of the folks who are out on thru hikes, for example, are extremely wealthy and they can just afford not to work for 6 months. I think that they give up a lot. And sometimes that's selling their home. Sometimes that's only doing seasonal jobs, so taking a big cut in pay from a career to working seasonal jobs, like maybe working on ski slopes all winter long and then hiking in the spring and the summer and then going back to doing something seasonal again. So it's definitely something that can be a big sacrifice for a one-time thing, or it can be a lifestyle change. But either way, I think the common denominator is these people decided that it was a big enough priority to them that they were going to make it happen. And that might not be that you can go off for a 6-month period. Maybe for you individually, that's saving up enough off time at work where you can go 1 week, and that's what you can do, but that's okay. But most of the people who do something like this, it didn't just come easy, or they didn't just have this beautiful golden opportunity handed to them. They had to really make some sort of big change in their lives to make it happen. Now, I understand that a single parent of 5 children is probably going to have a difficult time saving up enough money to go on a thru hike, let alone getting the time off work or quitting their job to go do it. I get that. But can't you always do a little bit more than what you're already doing to be happier or to head towards that goal that you have? So maybe that mom could take a couple of days of vacation time and take her family camping, and from that base camp they go on day hikes during the day, So I think the biggest thing that I realized at some point in my life is that I didn't want to live to work. I didn't want to just go to work and be miserable Monday through Friday just to get off and sit in my pajamas and feel sorry for myself all weekend long while I watched TV and ate ice cream. I mean, sometimes it's nice to do that, but I realized that I wanted more, and I wanted to make living a priority. But I had an ex-boss tell me that he wanted employees that lived to work. And I realized right then that I was definitely the wrong person for that company, because life is precious to me and I wanted to make sure that I could enjoy mine to the fullest. And thankfully, you know, I had the opportunity, because I didn't have any children or anybody depending on me, to make that lifestyle change when I did. But it's never too late for you, and it's never certainly too late to head in the direction of where you and it's certainly never too late to start heading in the direction of where you do want to go. I think people would be a lot happier as a whole if they would stop focusing on what they can't do and really start putting focus and effort into what they can do. The next question is, how old is too old to thru-hike the Appalachian Trail? I don't know if y'all have heard of him, but there is a man by the name of Nibblewell Nomad who set the record for the oldest person to thru-hike the AT last year, and he was 83 years old when he completed his hike. Several years back, there was a lady by the name of Dragonfly who was 74 years old when she completed her thru-hike of the AT. And then, as many of us are aware, Grandma Gatewood was the first woman to solo thru-hike the Appalachian Trail at the age of 67, which at that time made her the oldest person to complete a thru-hike of the AT. So all of that to say, it really just depends on the individual. I can't speak for your physical shape or your health, but I do think as people age in the backpacking community, it should be more of a priority to train before beginning a thru hike, as it makes sense that that would increase your success rate, and specifically to practice with carrying weight on your back. But if you decide last minute that you want to go out and thru hike the AT this year and you don't have weeks or months to prepare and physically train, then there's nothing wrong with getting out there and giving it a try. The wonderful thing about a thru hike is when you take your first couple steps on the trail, there's not this magical door that closes behind you and says you can't turn around and come back home. Now you have to make it to the end. So get out there and give it a go, and take it slow, listen to your body. And if you need to leave the trail and come back and do more the next hike in season, then that's okay. But I have seen all kinds of shapes and sizes and different backgrounds of people who got out there and were successful with their thru hikes of the AT. For example, there was a lady that I thru hiked with, and she was 71 years old when she completed the trail. Her name was Bluebird, and there were days when I would be in a treacherous part of the trail and I knew that Bluebird was several days ahead of me, and I'm like, if Bluebird did this, then I can do this. But there were people much younger than Bluebird who were not successful at completing their thru hike of the Appalachian Trail. So I say get out there and go for it. If you're interested, there is a group that's a spinoff of the Homemade Wanderlust Backpacking Forum group on Facebook, and it's hikers that are 55 plus. So I'm going to put a link to that group in the video description if you want to join there and talk with some people who are in the age range of 55 plus about their specific concerns and tips for backpacking.
All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, don't forget to share it with a friend. And if y'all have any other silly or embarrassing questions that weren't mentioned in these 100+ questions, then please feel free to leave those in the comments below. Thank y'all so much for watching, and we will see y'all next time.